in any SWAT team is going to be successful. Whether you run 10 warrants a year or 150 a year, you got to plan, you got to prep, and you got to do that, and you got to walk through that. And not only you got to understand it, but everybody else around you's got to understand what's expected of them, what's going to happen, how we're going to do it, what are our emergency action procedures if this happens, what is our fallback, and all those things. And so when you prepare for those things, it's easy to say, well, we'll handle it when we get there. Well, no, you've already handled it in training and in debriefs and walkthroughs. So when it comes time to apply it, you've already got that file there. You're just waiting. Okay, that's what it is. You just lay that card down on the deck, and you're like, there it is, right there. When you get there, I'm not at step 2 or 3. I'm already at step number 8 or 9, and I'm already at number 15 trying to work through that problem. How all that money we spend on training you and all this great gear, and you don't have what you need as a battery, and it fools operation. Just little things like that. It's those little things that require no great aptitude. It's just effort. And so having your gear ready, being prepared is a big thing. And I have been on the receiving end of a lot of things go my way just because you were quick. Great operators did great things that day and solve problems, which you want to do. And you realize really quick, like, I want to be on that camp, not in that camp. We came within a whisper of dying. And Dr. Alex Eastman and Dr. Jeff Metzger, what they did in that driveway, form an emergency tracheotomy and save that man's life, is just still unbelievable. Think about what they did.
You're listening to the ATO Bridging the Divide podcast, brought to you by the Assist the Officer Foundation.
Since 1999, the ATO has given assistance to the first responder community, and now we want to give them a platform to hear their incredible stories.
We also want to hear the stories of the many people that support us.
Our community is small, but it is strong.
We have differences. We don't always agree. And we all make mistakes.
But together we can grow, we can heal.
And we can learn from those mistakes.
And together we can bridge the divide.
Sun Tzu said, "The art of war is of vital importance to the state. It is a matter of life and death, a road either to safety or to ruin. Hence it is a subject of inquiry which can on no account be neglected. The art of war, then, is governed by 5 constant factors to be taken into account in one's deliberations when seeking to determine the conditions obtaining in the field. These are the moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, method, and discipline." Senior Corporal Matt Smith said, "Carry extra batteries or I'll break my foot off in your hind parts." Our guest today is a 23-year veteran of the Dallas Police Department, has been a part of the prestigious Dallas SWAT Team for over 17 years. During that time, he has been trained in just about every specialty role offered, including gas and less lethal, high angle, ballistic breaching, sniping, energetic breaching, and yes, ATO fans, the infamous zoo rifle. He has served as an assistant squad leader, or an ASL, for 6 years. He was born and raised in East By God, Texas, and a graduate of both Tyler Junior College and Sam Houston State University. He's been involved in numerous high-profile incidents and is looked at internally as a go-to guy for planning and training. Matt, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be back.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for doing this.
Absolutely.
Is it your 3rd or 4th time on?
3rd.
Hey, I see the downloads and your people demand you on, so we're gonna milk the hell out of you.
That's just my family doing that. We're just trying to help it out.
Just Smith County out there.
Yeah.
Those are my people, man.
All right, so I'm Kent Wolverton. I've got the mic today. Joe's getting a little bit tired of all this, so he said, hey, run with this. He's going to be with us today, and I've also got Danny. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about Matt Smith. And Matt, I know you're a big fan of the art of war, so we'll try to keep that in mind today as we progress through all these questions with you.
Sure.
But a couple softball questions. Let's get you started. Talk about growing up out in East Texas.
East Texas is great. We have a little bit of everything out there. And born and raised, lived almost my whole life in Wood County. And my mom still lives outside outside of Tyler. And we did a little bit of everything. We had Lake Fork. We went fishing all the time. you have the piney woods. You have more rain, you have more snow there than you do out here in Dallas. And I grew up in the country. I've done all the stuff that people think about Texas. They go, when you think about people, I've lived on a ranch. I did, the horse, know how to saddle horse and do all that. Baled hay for many years of my life, doing that for a doctor that I work for. And just a lot of that stuff that I think people, they symbolize with people being from Texas. Like I did a lot of that growing up in the country. And, I loved it. I had a great time growing up as a kid. Had a lot of fun. It's not a whole lot of it translates to living and working in Dallas, but at the same time, you just got to learn how to do things and do it the right way. Because when you're 16 years old on a trailer, a tractor, out in the middle of this, huge field hauling and baling hay, and you're by yourself. It's not like you can sit around and go, hey, what are we supposed to do or whatever. They basically show you how to do it, and like you need to learn how to do this, and you need to do it. And so you have to learn how to be safe, how to be responsible at a very early age, because you got a lot of equipment and a lot of stuff that you're responsible for that I wouldn't let my 16-year-old be in charge of. I can tell you that.
How old were you when you first started driving?
14.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it was
Probably a 1-ton truck.
Oh, yeah. Well, I had and I've told the guys a story before. I had a crew cab dually, 1-ton dually, and it had a granny low 4-speed in it, so it had a low 1, 2, and 3. So you never start off in low unless you had a little
pulling.
You're pulling a large load. And we ran a bungee from the seat frame through the steering wheel. You put it in low, and the truck would basically crawl. And whoever you were with that day, and sometimes by yourself, the truck would just drive itself, and you would stack the hay and load it on the square bales, which they're heavy, especially as a kid. And I'd wear out the top part of my jeans right there because you had to use your knee and your leg to kick it up because they're so heavy. And you would do that, and then as you start getting towards the end of the pasture, you'd run up, jump in the truck, you turn the truck around to go back down the other row of hay, and you did that by yourself, at 15. And it's not, look, people do that all the time. It is, thousands of kids do that all the time, but that's what you did. And you're driving a tractor that probably cost at the time, $40,000 to $50,000 with a $30,000 or $40,000 baler behind it with the lights flashing, going down a little FM road, and people are passing you, and you're 15 years old.
Yeah, I baled hay. That was some of the hardest work because you had to walk alongside the trailer and stack it up. And then what really sucked is when you got to where you needed to deliver it, you go inside a shed and unstack it inside there, and you're breathing in all the look
at all that dust and everything we inhaled.
It's an allergy nightmare.
Oh yeah, and but I tell you, it helped me getting ready for football every year because you're out in the heat and you're in shape. So it wasn't like you had to come back and acclimate to the heat like a lot of kids did because you've been outside working all summer. And it was, making good money for a 15-year-old kid. You getting paid several dollars an hour.
You earned it, though.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you earned it. I tell you what, it made me, I was like, I don't want to do this for a living. I can tell you that. So I was like, I got to go on and do something different. But it was fun, and you got to do a lot of things. So, a lot of good stuff in East Texas. I had great fun. I grew up fishing on Lake Fork, which if anybody knows, bass fishing, especially around here, it's great. But those fish are fished so hard that you really kind of got to have good tackle and kind of know what you're doing because it's not little perch you're going after out there.
What point in your life did you find out that you talk funny?
I did not know I talked funny almost till I moved up here, which is funny because going to Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, though it's still not the East Texas that I grew up in. It's small enough and still East Texas enough to some degree where there was enough of people that sound like me, I guess, where I just kind of blended in. And so, not that I didn't know that, Gil, because, I have family out in California. My mom was born there. We've been out to California many times. And so people would say something, but you're just like, well, they're weird. They're from California. They just don't listen right.
There's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah, there's but I have been all up and down, California. I've been to, North Carolina. I've been all over the lower half of the U.S. And, people will say, hey, say this or say that. And you just like, well, because you're from Texas. Now I realize I'm from East Texas. Texas is so big that we have our own dialect, so it is. But yeah, I really didn't even think about it too much as far as people from Texas thinking that I sounded different until I moved up here.
Well, that leads right into my next question. Explain the difference between windows and winders.
Well, you have a window. Well, there's a bunch of winders over there, so it's plural.
And windows is multiple plurals?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
It just depends on which side of the state you're standing in, whether that's correct or not.
Okay, so why did you choose Dallas PD?
Well, it wasn't like I sat up and said, hey, that's where I'm going to go. And I think, and I'll admit this now, back then, I think the U.S. Marshals was really what I really wanted to do. I thought that was going to be the place to go. And I thought that'd be really cool. And at that time, I graduated our college in '99. They were like, hey, we're not really not hiring right now. Go get some experience, all these things. And so I was like, where can I go to get real experience and do a lot of things early on, And so I was like, the large cities. You have Houston, you have Dallas, you have San Antonio, you have Austin, you're looking at places like that. And being from East Texas, Dallas is obviously closer to where I grew up. I knew I was more familiar with the Dallas. I had a cousin who was on Dallas PD. He's much older than me. He was actually older than my dad, but Danny Green was his name, and he pinned my badge on me because he was on for a couple of years. I think he left or he retired probably. I'd probably been on. I just come to SWAT, so maybe about six. Maybe after I've been on, maybe 6 years. He retired, but he'd been on for a long time. He worked patrol his whole career, Southwest. He was down there his whole life, and Danny's just like, hey, I don't care where you go. Every department has its inherent issues. I don't care where you work. Dallas is no different. He said, but at the time, we have a great pension, we have a great retirement. Everything was really good here. If you come here, you need to realize that this is a big city and things happen here. This is not to be taken lightly. And the recruiter called me, and I was in my senior year of college, and he says, hey, can you start the academy, which is like late February. I'm like, I'm about to graduate in May. Like, why would I quit now? He's like, well, we don't want to know we're going to have another academy. And I was like, well, I guess it's not going to Dallas. And Houston was like, we're not doing anything. And I'd actually called, and because I have family out in L.A., I was actually scheduled to go do their weekend trip in L.A. to do, and you just don't know. You're just trying to, I wasn't loyal to anything.
So what all agencies did you apply for?
Well, I only applied technically with, I did a form, kind of like a questionnaire for Houston PD, Dallas, and then I did the same thing for L.A. But Dallas is the only one that I did the full 9 yards, if you want to call it that, of applying, because everybody else was like, hey, we're not doing anything right now. On hold. It was like, we're not hiring right now. And I just didn't want to do a smaller department. Now, that doesn't mean anything against them. It's just in my mind, I wanted to go to a large metropolitan department to get experience. And it was Dallas and Houston. San Antonio wasn't doing anything. Austin wasn't doing anything. And, having family out in L.A. and, again, just being 22, 20, whatever, just naive. You're just like, I'll go out there and check it out and see what I was doing. And so I called them, and they were like, very much like what we do here. You come out for the weekend, you knock it all out in a couple of days, and then we let you know. And I was like, when can they do that? And they go, we do them about every other week. It's just a big, it's just what we do. And so I was scheduled to go, and then something happened. I couldn't go, and it was like, okay, I'm just going to finish up my senior year. And the Dallas guy called and says, hey, we pushed a class back from the one I was going to go to here. I'm like, I graduate like in 2 weeks. I'm like, why would I start now? Same kind of thing. He's like, okay, well, that class ended up getting pushed back to June, and which was my class, 262. And it just kind of the way things kept working out, and it was like, it just worked out too. I don't say easy, but it was just good timing. DPS wasn't hiring, Houston wasn't hiring, and I was like, do I really want to go out to all the way out to California and start do all that? Not that I couldn't have. I was like, let me go up to Dallas, and they were doing the same thing. I was like, hey, you can finish everything. And I had done all that in November in Dallas, or in Houston for Dallas, and they called and go, can you start June 11th, which is a Friday. This is my academy class started on a Friday, which I don't know if they do that now, but we did. We started on June 11th of '99. It was a Friday. And he says, can you be up here? I said, yeah. And so I was working for the Sheriff's Department, Walker County Sheriff's Department in Huntsville, in the jail. And I'd been in there almost 2 years, and I went in, gave them my notice, and they were like, would you consider staying here? I'm like, no. I was like this. I was like, hey, tell you what, one of the best things you can do is work in a jail, especially, early on, because you get over you're having to go put hands on people, and search them and, and deal with people and all that, because that's just it's not something you grow up doing, having to, and so working in a jail, when you're in there, all 8 hours dealing with people, and you learn their scams, and you like, because as a person in general, you want to believe people. You think people don't try to lie, don't try to scam you. You learn very early on in working in a jail, 40 hours a week, everything they say is a lie. Everything they do is try to scam you.
I think that probably puts you, I experienced something similar working at the mental hospital before this, is it introduces you to being in a hyper vigilant state all the time. You have to be aware of your surroundings, as opposed to when I drove a forklift. I mean, I didn't worry about anything.
Yeah.
Maybe a box falling on me. But when you're around other human beings and you're hearing them speak and you're watching their body language and their mannerisms, being so young, and that probably, I would imagine, helped you with
I was
that.
19 when I started the sheriff's department.
Yeah, as opposed to trying to learn that as a rookie on the street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, you have to get over it real quick, just that hesitation. And I know on first phase, dealing with people, and it was just, because you're just past it. It's a confidence thing, like, hey, this is the right thing to do. I need to do this. And so there's no question that helped me, early on. And I look back, it was a good time. I got good friends that I still have from there. And so, yeah, that was it. That's how I ended up in Dallas. It was just timing more than anything. And 23 years later, here I am.
So this could have easily been Matt Smith, LAPD SWAT episode.
Well,
if it goes looking back, if you went to LA,
you just never know. I mean, I never did I walk into DPD going, I'm going to try to go to SWAT. Okay. That was not part of the plan. I was not that I really had a plan, but it wasn't like I walked in going, that's what I really want to do.
Did you think maybe this was? Did you ever still have the U.S. Marshal still in the back of your mind? Okay.
No, I tested for the U.S. Marshals. June of 2001. Okay, what happened September 2001?
A lot of shit happened. Yeah.
9/11.
Yeah.
And there was like 900 of us at the convention center that signed up for that test because they had a hiring freeze for the last couple of years. They weren't doing anything. And so I went down there to take that test with every intention, because I wasn't married. I was, whatever. I was like, I'm going to take this. I'm going to get this job, and I'm out of here. And 9/11 happened, and it locked everything up. And then the U.S. Marshals totally changed their whole directives and what they did. And this is before really emails, they sent actual still letters back then saying, if you want to be considered for this new role of a U.S. Marshal, understand these are the things that are going on now. We'll continue otherwise. And I was like, that's not what I didn't want to be.
Air Marshals, that's what they
Well, the big thing was Air Marshals and courtroom security. That was the big thing.
82. So
yeah, and I was like, no, thank you. And again, not sit there and go, I wish this, that. It's just sometimes just the way the life shakes out, And so that's what happened. I declined to keep the going in the process, and that was it for me. Yeah.
Talk about where you went on the department early in your career and what kind of police work you were drawn to.
He didn't go. He just stayed at Northeast the whole time.
Just sat there.
And just
I did nothing. Yeah. Well, what's funny is that when you're in the academy, and of course, a lot of the FTOs that come out to say, if you want to be real police, and there's no South Central back then, you
go to Southeast.
They go Southeast, or some of them say, South. Well, my cousin worked Southwest, and they're like this, and they're like every other channel's whatever. And so, and there was only 26 of us that graduated in my academy. We had a real small academy class, and we had some people that were from Dallas. And so, when you put your list in, I put in Southeast and then Northeast because I was living in Mesquite at the time. I'm like, well, that's just easier to drive, and we were like almost all of us were selected for Southeast or Southwest out of the 26. And what we were told is that at the time, we still had captains in the department when I heard on. And each division had one captain. And the captain in the Northeast basically pushed back and says, we need more officers up here. Our call load, which it is, that call load's out of control. It still is. And we need up here. And so if you had Northeast anywhere in your first couple, we all got rerouted to Channel 2. And I think 9 of 26 of us went to Channel 2 out of my class.
That's a lot.
Yeah, Matt Finley, a lot of us. And, hey, there's great police on every channel. There's less than stellar police on every channel and every watch. And I went up there, and you learn real quick, hey, this thing is moving.
It's busy. Yeah,
it is busy, and you have all the apartments and everything. And so it's a different style up there. And I mean, we were in chases and doing all this. I had a great time. I learned a lot up there, and just like every channel, again, it comes back to your FTOs, who you have. They really kind of help put you in that general mold and all that. And I had my first FTO was great. He was just, he was good at just easing things in, and learning the job and just trying to figure things out. My third phase trainer, Rob Harmon, great guy, great street cop. He knew just about, he's like, hey, do the, he just knew all that stuff. And I learned so much from that guy that it really just, kind of helped me set my, my style, how I wanted to be once I got out there by myself. So, but that's how I ended up at Channel 2 is because they wanted people, or, they, I guess, complained enough to say, hey, we need some more people. And so 9 of the 26 of us went up there. Yep.
Well, that's not too bad, I guess. If you have to go to Northeast, you can get drafted that way.
Yeah.
When did you decide that SWAT was what you wanted to do?
Well, again, not walking in there thinking SWAT was a thing. Where I was working at the time, the 5 points was the 240s, and I was element 246, and it's just I had part of 5 points was part of my beat, and they had come in there and and Sergeant Alfred Nunez had just taken over that sector, and he was like, I need some people to work these beats, and he says, I'm going to shake some things up. He asked me if I'd come over. I said, yeah, I'd be happy to come over there, because we were at 5 points all the time anyway because of all the calls, and so I just went to I went to the 240s and stayed up there and was answering just calls and just doing, chasing, stolen cars, doing everything that everybody else was doing, having a good time with it. And the ATF wanted to do a joint investigation up there that was going to go on for like a year, and they were meeting with, at the time when Chief Brown was Lieutenant Brown he was the admin lieutenant over there, and Turnage was our deputy chief. They had a meeting with them, and they just said, hey, we need to bring in some people that know the 5 points there. So they just kind of found a few guys that knew the people around 5 points, just kind of had their finger on the pulse of the sector. And I got pulled into this meeting, and the ATF agent was in there, and they're like, hey, we understand that you know about this sector, can you help us out? Like, sure. And I said, okay, what do you need? He goes, well, we're going to get with you about this. Okay. So I started going back to detail because they're out for detail, and they go, no, you're going to deployment. I was like, okay. I was like, I didn't know we were going to. He goes, there's no openings. We're just putting you over there so you can work with the ATF to do all this kind of stuff. And it was right then and there you start working on deployment, and now you're out of the big mold of just answering calls with, 50 guys just shagging calls, and now you're in a small group that's working on a more specific task, a little bit more specialized. And like within 1 week, I was like, man, this is so awesome. Being able to go and work on certain things, not just being hung up on that radio, having to answer calls. And
teamwork and specific, we're honing your skills on a specific job.
And learning that job. And then you see these guys that you really didn't interact with too much, and you're like, these guys have been on for a long time. And Dave DeRica, Mario Castanon, all those guys they're great street cops, and they knew so much. And you're like, I knew nothing about this world. Like, I've been on for a couple of years. I'm like, how did I not know about all this? It's just because you're just busy shagging calls. That's all you do. And you're doing your own little thing in your car. And so you start doing this, and, next thing I know, I was like, man, this was the greatest time. I mean, being able to be, mission-driven, centric on things. And so you're just doing that and working with things. And when I went through the academy, Steve Huff, who had been in SWAT for a long time, was out at the range. And just Steve was in charge of my group that I was being trained at the range. And Steve, his last couple of years, he wanted to come back to patrol before he retired. He left the range. And so when he came back out, just being busy doing things out in patrol and just interacting with the guys, he was the first one that said to me, he goes, hey, have you ever thought about going to SWAT? And I said, not really. I said, I'd been on for a couple of years. I was like, I don't know. I just was having so much fun doing what I was doing. He goes, it's something you ought to look into. I think you'd be really good at that. I think you would enjoy it. He goes, if you like what you're doing now, I think that's kind of like that same mold, that small unit. And so I thought about it, and, just different guys would talk about it. Then Director McCollum comes up and says the same thing and says, hey, you need to go do this. And we walked in one day, and we were just doing our stuff. And, it was just kind of like it just kind of sunk in, hey, that might be something I want to do. And it's not like it is now with the ability to get to with those guys is just different. Other than SWAT putting on, for my group, we went through active shooter, or we called it rapid rescue, because we didn't do it in the academy like they do now. It was after the fact. And so we went out to NAS and went through that. That was really the only kind of exposure interaction I ever had with SWAT. And I was like, that'd be really cool. And so kind of once that talk started doing, and then went out there and did the active shooter stuff with SWAT, you're like, man, this is really cool. And it kind of just whet your appetite. And I walked in one day, and Mario Castanon said, hey, there's an opening on the internet for SWAT. He goes, you going to put it? Cause I've been talking about it. He goes, you going to put in for it? And they're like, are you going to check it out? I was like, no, I want to pursue this. And I went through the whole thing, emailed Sergeant Gary Henley, who ended up being the sergeant that selected me. I put in for it, and we tested in November, did our interviews in December, I believe. And I was supposed to come over in February, and just like every other transfer, he got hung up and stalled. And I came over on a special assignment in March, and then April of 2005, I came over. And so it was kind of like a whirlwind. It happened in, just kind of talking about it for about a year or two, and then bam, here's the opening. I applied, and
it got real.
It did, and you don't realize just how real it is till you get over there. You're like, man.
So how many people applied whenever you applied?
Well, for me, there was 21 of us that put in for the one opening.
One opening.
Yeah.
Okay. And just for the listener, we've had on several people from SWAT on this podcast. Can you kind of talk about the process of when you apply and all that you have to go through to be selected?
Well, it's different back then than it is now, but at the same time, it's, and they mirror some. That you have an opening, you apply for it, and at that time, openings only come up every now and then. It was just different back then, and you had to.
I was just saying, you got to wait for someone to drop off.
Right.
Either they decide to retire or attrition or injury, and they can't do it anymore.
Right. Yeah. So you put in, and at that time, you had to gather all your documents, your pistol qualifications, your driving record. That's a big thing because obviously you're getting a take-home car. And then your time cards, things like that. And this is the same stuff you have to do for any. Even today, you still do all that. You have to gather all that, submit it, and then you email the sergeant saying, "Hey, I'd like to be considered for this opening." Sure. At that time, they brought you in for the PT test. That was the first thing you had to do. And first thing. And before you do anything else, because if you can't make the PT test, then you don't continue. And so out of the 21 of us that took the test, 2 of them failed, so only had 19 of us moving forward. And it was kind of like today. It was kind of a overcast, late November day, cool. I mean, it was not very good, conducive for outside. And so we show up at Central, take the PT test, drive over to Cobb, finish it out there, and you're just out there with a bunch of SWAT guys that are just timing you and telling you and getting your name because they don't know who you are. And the guys that I worked with in deployment, they showed up out there, and we worked third watch, so they drove in on their own time, to be there early in the morning in bad weather to cheer you on, to support you. And I'll never forget those guys for doing that.
Nice.
It was good dudes, and there's Mario and Dave and them all yelling at you, just trying to make fun of you at the same time you're running your laps and everything. But great guys. And Sergeant Henley is in the van. I didn't even know who he was or whatever. Never even met him yet. And so you're getting done, and they pull up in the warrant van. He slides the door open and goes, "All right, good job. I'll be in touch. Get out of here." And we're like, "Who is that?" And they're like, "That's the sergeant you're applying with." It's like, okay. It's like, did not see him the whole day because he was inside the van staying out of the weather, so he was smart. And so you took the PT test, and then they schedule your interview. And they email you, and you come in and do your interview. And back then, you interviewed with the sergeant and the squad that had the opening. It is not like it is now with a panel of supervisors. And so the one sergeant and then the squad that had the opening was doing the panel. And so you sat down and talked just them and them only. And, of course, they go over, they had all their questions they ask you and, what do you think it needs to be in SWAT and all that. And it's just once you kind of get into that, and, man, you want to do that. That's something you really want to do, which I did, man. I could not wait. Like, and you don't have any idea you're going to get picked. But I was like, it was like my mission.
You have an opportunity.
Yeah, we have an opportunity. But it was like, man, this is what I want to do. I will not, be turned away. And I was already telling myself, I don't get this one, because you're always told nobody gets picked the first time, all this kind of stuff. Just be prepared. And I understand why people said that. But so I'd already kind of said, hey, I'm probably not going to get this one, but it's good exposure. Come in and do the best. And then it was like my quest to come back, and to reapply as many times as I needed to get over here. And so you what was weird is the station sergeant at the time said, "Hey, your PAR came through for SWAT." I didn't even know what that really meant. I'm like, "What does that mean?" They go, "You're going to SWAT." I had not been told that officially, and they're like, I was like, "I hadn't heard that." He's like, "Well, okay, forget that I told you that, because it's probably not supposed to be told you that." And
typical bad communication.
Yeah. And so I had not heard anything from SWAT, so I sat on it for a few days. And then I got a hold of the Sergeant Henley. He's like, "Hey, there's a hang-up in personnel. I'll be in touch." And it took a little while for it, just like every other transfer, they'd never go off without a hitch. And so he called and said, "Hey, we're getting you over on special assignment. Your transfer goes over in a couple weeks. Meet us at the range." And so that's kind of how it happened. And here I am, over 17 years later, still here.
So talk about the guys that were in your squad. Who was influential to you early on?
Well, again, you had a much bigger team back then, and A and E unit were really 2 units. And not that you didn't see the other guys in the other unit, but you had the guys in E unit. And you come over and you had...
What squad?
Well, I was in the 70s, which was the sniper squad.
Right.
And you had Kristen D'Alessandro and Eric Eisenberg were the 2 in the squad. And they were this... again, just the snipers. So back then, the specialized, their specialties were broken up into, you had 2 entry teams. The 50s and the 80s were the entry teams. The 60s were the negotiators, and the 70s were the snipers. And even though you were in that squad, as a new guy, you're expected to go do all this training with the entry teams. And so Tim Houston was the ASL of the 50s, and Bodie Sarton was the ASL of the 80s at the time. And Tim had Guy Schwartz. He had Misty Van Kuren, Todd Wellhouse, and those guys. And then Bodie had Dale Hackbarth and Chuck Del Tufo and Ed Menchaca. And those were kind of like, you could tell those were the groups of the two entry teams that kind of like, those are the guys that kind of knew what was going on and really everybody went to. And so my first week over here, Sergeant Henley says, okay, if we show up on anything and I'm not there, he goes, you go find Tim Houston. He goes, you just stay with him. You do exactly what he tells you to do. He goes, don't go anywhere else. And I hadn't even met Tim at the time. And I was like, okay. And I was like, so he's like, you just go find him and he's probably going to stick you in a corner somewhere and just stay out of the way. And because he's like, I'll be doing my thing on, wherever he is. He says, basically saying, I don't have time to deal with you. You just go find somebody else and let them deal with you because I'm busy. And I get that. That's fine. No big deal. And so you're just learning different things. A lot of those guys all contributed in one way or another. But, I don't care where you are. You move to a new school or you go to a new job. You start trying to line up people who you have similar views and, and ways of doing things and how you simulate and everything. And there's no question, I was listening to Tim, and not that Bodie and Dale and those guys didn't do a lot for us. They did, and they did a lot of stuff. But Bodie left, relatively, soon after I got there, and we had that big realignment, and this is the way it did. And so there's, no doubt that Tim was probably the most instrumental as far as, helping show us how to do this job. Not just me, all the new guys. Everybody just listen to him because, again, you look around and go, that dude knows what he's talking about. And not that everybody else didn't either, but like that dude is the dude.
What stuck out most? What stuck out most? What he preached that
with Tim?
Yeah.
Well, just a very easygoing, calm manner, and just like, hey, this is, and stating the obvious. Like, look, we're not for the faint of heart over here. You got to learn this job. And you got to learn it. You got to learn it. You got to figure it out how to do it because it's real, and because he had been here for a long time. And, he had been involved in a lot of stuff, so he knew what the time of day and all that kind of was. And I think he's smart enough to realize, hey, you got to set that precedence early and mold these guys and let them know it's not time to be like all your work to get here means nothing other than you're here. It starts today. And he's like, there's a lot going on, and you got to learn how to do this job. And he's just, because he was a sniper at times, and he was a breacher, and obviously an ASL and entry guy, that he understood you just can't be one-dimensional. Like, you got to come over here and you got to fit in and be able to be an asset. And he would say, hey, we're going to go do training today. Do you want to come with us? Because I wasn't in his squad. And it wasn't just me, the other new guys too. And he was like, yeah. And so we would go and do stuff. And he took time to show you the basics, learn how to do the basic stuff, to do what's really, important. And
foundation for
there's no question.
How to be a solid professional. That's one thing. You just look at him and he just looks like a professional.
Yeah.
Misty loves him.
Yeah, well, he was her ASL. Yeah, he's a solid dude, and he doesn't get the recognition that he deserves, and, people can say, I'm like, maybe I'm biased towards him. I'll say it right now. There's nothing wrong emulating somebody who's been doing it, the same job you're doing at a high level for a long time. And people, you may not like that person, but you'll never hear anybody say, that dude didn't know what he was doing, or he wasn't squared away. Everybody knows that, and he is, and I'm good friends with him today. And so, again, just like every trainer, you had multiple trainers on training. There's one guy probably that you had an FTO that you're like, now Rob Harmon was mine, that you mold your game after. There's no doubt. And so, I still do things today that I hear myself saying things now that I heard him say to us, because he's just a squared away dude, and and I'm very thankful to have that opportunity to learn from him. Yeah.
You keep mentioning ASL. Can you describe to the listener, the non-police, what ASL is? Because you were actually one yourself.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Again, it's just like and for people in the military, those non-commissioned officers, that's what an ASL is, assistant squad leader, and they are the senior guys that are in those squads that. It is not that you have to be the biggest, strongest, the fastest, or the best shooter. It helps to be really good at all that. But he's that guy that knows what to do. He's squared away, that people trust. And when they comms up on the radio and going, this is what we need to do, people don't hesitate going, that's probably the best thing to do because they have confidence in him. So that's the biggest thing about that is having a squad leader in ASL is that when you suggest something, you bring things up, and not necessarily you're going to agree with it, but they have confidence in what you're saying. Like, that guy's done it. He's been there. He's probably done what he's saying 1,000 times, or he's maybe trying to help me out saying, hey, you might want to consider doing this. And so those guys are instrumental. And just like in they run the show. I mean, they're the guys that make this thing work every day. There's no doubt.
Is it like a liaison between the squad and a sergeant, basically?
Yeah,
in
there's
a way?
no doubt. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I think any good sergeant understands, especially because majority of sergeants that come over were never in SWAT as operators, so they really have to rely on their ASLs to bridge that gap and to help that. And even if you have been there before, it's a culture there, and it's been in Dallas SWAT long before I got there. It'll be there long after I'm gone. That this is how it's all set up, and it runs smoothly this way because those ASLs are in the fire. They're up there making those decisions at the door, and I think everybody recognizes that. Hey, that's just the way to do it.
I'll ask Kent's perspective on what an ASL is, because he's been on before, right, on the podcast. Have you introduced him really before?
Kent?
I don't know if the listeners know that Kent used to be a team leader or a sergeant on SWAT.
We didn't really go into that
How
much.
many years?
6.5.
Yeah. So what's your perspective on what an ASL is?
I think the A actually stands for actual, as far as the actual squad leader. Stepping over there, in my experience, and I don't want to make it about me today, but you quickly realize how much you don't know, or you step on your own. You don't want to be that guy who's trying to make the calls on these situations when you don't know what you're doing. So you rely very heavily on the guys that do. And I think that the ASL position is genius in the way we implement it in the Dallas SWAT team, because it allows somebody who has the experience and the knowledge to be that leader still. And I mean, I look at it as the actual squad leader more than the assistant squad leader, because you're not assisting anybody. You're really being assisted by the sergeant more than anything.
Yeah. I tell the story. We were on this call at one time, and I'm just like, I've got all these ideas about what I want to do. And I was like, what about this? What about this? And, Tim's just sitting there looking at me and goes, okay, here's the 9 reasons why we don't want to do that. And he just lists off one, and you're just like, I didn't even think about that. And he's like, he goes, you will, you'll figure it out. People do. It just takes time. And because they've been there, made those mistakes themselves, and they've been the new guy a long time ago, and it's not for everybody, just like in any other job. But you have to have a lot of focus and attention span about what's going on, because you got to be able to take in not just what you're doing, but what everybody's doing. And you duck of a quarterback or something like that, where you're having to see what all the different protection and routes and all that. So there's a lot going on. I'm not trying to oversell it. It is, but hey, there were great ASLs when I got here. It is a task that when I got the job, when he left and I got that job, I didn't take it lightly. I take a lot of pride in doing that job, and I work hard at it. And and I've made my mistakes, as you will, but it's something that I come in every day going, hey, you got to be great, because people, I think there's a great saying, when much is given, much is expected. And so I think that's a great way of looking at it, that they're counting on you, and that's your job.
Yeah, and I've always felt like you've treated that as its own specialty. Like you study leadership, you're studying how to be a good ASL and manage a squad, not just it's a label. It's a label that gets attached at the end of your name as a job descriptor.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Pressure's a privilege, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, like you said, anybody can type those letters behind your name, but if the guys don't believe in you, don't have trust in you, it doesn't really matter. It's just an element number for that at that point.
Let's go back to talking about Tim Houston. I mean, he's just basically the prototypical SWAT guy. Like, when you close your eyes at night and you're having your bad dreams, Tim Houston is the one you want to show up. I mean, squared away uniform,
square jaw, put together,
a
can
flat
shoot,
top you can set your clock to. Yeah,
just and make decisions, and also command and provide leadership.
He's enormous. Yeah. I mean, he's just a big dude. Like, I mean, he was in his 50s still doing this stuff, and he'd be in there deadlifting and barefoot in the gym. You're just like, what? Who is this guy?
I just saw him the other day, and Tim, he could pass the PT test right now.
Oh, no doubt.
And again, and he was that professional. That, and again, all different types. And I learned how to do this job a lot from him. Do I do exactly the way he did? No, you're going to put your own spin on, your own flair. I'm maybe a little bit more direct than he was. I tell the story too. He'd be like, "Did you see what Joe did?" You're like, "No." He's like, "Okay, well, this, whatever." And I'm like, "Okay, well, are you gonna go yell at him?" Or he's like, "No, you go talk to him." And that's just kind of the way he's doing things. Like, he would try not just to overbear, like just come down on top. He would talk about it and just see if other people recognized it, and then like has a group. So instead of just him just coming and telling you, hey, you're wrong, don't ever do that again. We would discuss it like, hey, what was the thought on this, Joe? And you're like, okay, this, and then kind of walk you through it. And a lot of times he would let you tell yourself, I just screwed this up, you're an idiot, whatever. And you're like, man, that's a Jedi mind trick he just pulled on me, like he got me to admit it without even saying it. And I just think it's part of his own genius in his own way. That's just his style. And many times I was involved in that, either him sending somebody over telling me don't ever do that again, or he'd involve this. And I look back on those years and learning that job again. Chuck Del Tufo had a great personality, and I love Chuck, and he did a lot of things. He was much more vocal about certain things, and with that Boston accent that he has, and he was I love the way he talked about things. But again, when it was all really getting crazy, when things need to be settled down, he just walked right in and go, okay, this is what we're going to do. ABC 1, 2, 3, and everybody's like, okay, it's time to. You knew who the boss was. You knew who was in charge. And he's like, and if my family was being held hostage, there's nobody I'd want, running that detail more than him.
Real professional.
Right now.
Real professionals.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no doubt.
All right, so back to our book here. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Explain how that resonates with you in your developing plans for SWAT. The dynamic versus surround and call out, or even the development of the matrix. The different things that you do before you even get into fighting.
Well, one of the things that you learn early over here, it is not about just shooting X rings and bench pressing weight and doing all this. All that matters. Don't kid yourself. It does. But it's a thinking man's game over here more than anything. And there are a lot of good dudes out there that can shoot really good or bench press all this, or do all this. Doesn't mean it's going to equate to what we do. It is absolutely a thinking man's game. You got to realize that early on. And it's not just about showing up and doing PT and shooting and doing all those other things. You've got to learn not just the how to do it, but the why to do it. And that's something we talked about in the Dynamic Warrant podcast, is that you got to learn these jobs and you got to learn how they apply. And today's operation, it may be 100% applicable the way we're going to do it this way, and tomorrow's might be something totally different. And so that's what that professional is you got to learn how to apply them equally at any given moment. The only way you're going to do that is by training and reps and live experience. And I think that's what a lot of people don't recognize that goes into it. So the art of war talks about that, the mindset of preparing, to win before you ever go. And so that's how you win these wars. And, for us, the operations is by doing all this pre-planning and having all this set. And even if it's a live or like a HR you're getting called out to, even though you're not pre-planning it, you are in a sense, and you're doing your training, you're doing your walkthroughs, you're doing your runs, you're doing your reps, is that you're preparing for that. And that is something that I think that, in any SWAT team is going to be successful. Whether you run 10 warrants a year or 150 a year, you got to plan, you got to prep, and you got to do that, and you got to walk through that. And not only you got to understand it, but everybody else around you's got to understand what's expected of them, what's going to happen, how we're going to do it, what are our emergency action procedures if this happens, what is our fallback, and all those things. And so when you prepare for those things, it's easy to say, well, we'll handle it when we get there. Well, no, you've already handled it in training and in debriefs and walkthroughs. So when it comes time to apply it, you've already got that file there. You're just waiting. Okay, that's what it is. You just lay that card down on the deck, and you're like, there it is, right there. So I think that applies much to what he's saying in that. In that.
Is it just preparing for contingencies?
Yeah.
B and C and D and E. If needed.
Well,
that way you
if
at least have something in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you're going through the A side door and the C side door, and we're doing two, breach points with port and covers and a pool and all this, you go, okay, this is our plan. This is our master plan, how we want everything to go. Now, here's 8 things that we can see right now that could throw this off. There could be a car out front that keeps the pool from going. We could have people out front, which we've had. I've had a woman walking out the door behind, letting the cage door slam behind her, holding a 8-month-old baby because she just went in there and bought dope with holding her baby in her hands. That totally throws off what you're trying to do on the front side. And so you have to talk about all these contingencies. There's no time for a committee out there when all this thing's bailing off of APC or jumping out of the van, and that thing's already moving. You got 20-something guys that are going to their missions. You can't get on the radio and get all that out. There's no way. And so you have to have – it's kind of like a scramble drill to equate it to the NFL or something like that, that if the quarterback's protection breakdown, he starts scrambling, you're like, the route that I'm running right now won't solve this. I've got to do this. And so – that's very, similar. What this is that you're pulling up, and we now see that there are people outside on the A side. Well, if they're going to the C side, they know right now that they're not doing the pool. Matt and those guys are not going to do the pool on the A side with the APC because there's 9 people out front. Right? We can't do that. We can't put those people in harm's way. So now they recognize that they're having to alter their plan. And we've already talked about that. If we can't do the pool, we're going up to this. We're going to go manual, and Joe, you're bringing the pry up. And we're going to do the pry on the cage. We're not doing the pool. And everybody's already talked about that. But if you don't go over that in training and work on that and practice that and discuss that in your pre-plan and your pre-brief, because when you do show up and those people are in the front yard and you can't do that, it all falls apart. And then everybody's like, what are we going to do? Because you don't have time to get on the radio and talk about that because it's live, and those people are scattering, going everywhere, and that's how you win on a dynamic warrant, is being dynamic. And when you're slowing down, you don't know what to do, you lose that initiative, and that's how things can go wrong.
You have to prepare for the what ifs.
Oh, absolutely.
They don't happen.
Yeah, there's no question.
Yeah, like Matt's talking about, it's not just even preparing for it, but it's just having it in the front of the mind and worked out. And Matt talks about even having it rehearsed, like physically, it's in the muscle memory, rehearsing some of this stuff, because if you go live and do this and things start changing and there's audibles, that takes up brain power, a lot more brain power, whereas I've already worked through it before and I've thought about it and I've rehearsed it, and it's not only in my mind, it's in my muscles.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, mentally rehearse things is so important. Even Danny, even we're out there chasing dope, just imagining,
visualizing what we were going to do, like, hey, here's the plan. Yep.
Well, you talk to any great batter, they talk about that, making contact with the ball, and you listen to was listening to a guy that was a billiards, he does a 9-ball, and he was talking about how he lines the shots up in his mind. So when the break happens and he's seeing the balls, he's just seeing how that whole, when I hit it here, how he's setting, and I think that's a good illustration. He's like, if I hit the 2-ball trying to go to the 3, I got the cue ball, I've got to get it over there to line me up because of where that ball is. And so but I'm also looking at the 4-ball and then the 5, and that is very much like what we,
where your actions put you. Do they put you in a better position as well? So not just taking an action on something, but after I take that action, where does that end up the team, or where do we end up with this?
And and senior guys, and and Daniel does a great job. We have a lot of guys over there. It's not just the ASL that does that. We have a lot of guys that can do that. But in a sense, he's going to come back to you like, hey, that's your part of your job, is not only to make sure that somebody has done it, but then it's correct and you apply it. And so you see that a lot with us. It's like, okay, if there's a car out front, what are we going to do? If there's people out front, we're going to do. Or if they're not there, what are we going to do? And so a lot of that matters. That pre-planning is critical.
So from the supervisor standpoint, the way you guys would plan things in Dallas, the sergeant really doesn't plan it. The sergeant is almost the approval,
right,
and then a conduit to the lieutenant who actually finally approves what we're actually going to be able to do. So knowing that there's guys that actually understand all the nuances, and then when I came in and I'd say, okay, tell me what you want to do, I could ask some people why they wanted to do it, and they wouldn't be able to answer. And at that point, I had to look to somebody else and be like, hey, why are we doing this?
Right.
Let's talk about what could happen here and what couldn't. And you get that a lot with the newer guys when they're starting to plan warrants. Initially, they're planning it with somebody more senior, and then when they get on their own, sometimes they haven't picked up all the messages that you were giving them. So from the supervisor standpoint, it was nice to have those guys that could come in and say, hey, this is why we want to do what we want to do. And it makes it a whole lot easier for me to say, okay, I know that Matt understands what he wants to do with this. Now I feel more comfortable explaining it to the lieutenant.
Sure, yeah.
Talk about developing your matrix. How many times have you done that?
Oh, man. Well.
And I want to document it on the internet.
Yes.
For keeps.
Well, I can tell you that. Well, I don't know if I have a good number. It is many renditions.
Well, first of all, is there an acronym for it? There has to be an acronym for it, right?
Well, I guess
if not, we'll
let Joe come up with it by the end of the deal.
Yeah, I'm going to work on that now. Turn my mic off.
And that started a long time ago before really it was even more of it wasn't even really a catchphrase back then. It was, and we were just sitting around, and it was, and I was like, this was many, many years ago, and that I was like, we got to come up with a better way of doing this. And, I think, all great ideas start off like, well, somebody needs to do that. And it's like, well, somebody needs, and then it's just like, what, I'm going to look into this. And I kind of did, and I just kind of got hungry with the idea that I think there's a better way of doing it, and started reaching out. And
really explain it, because I don't know that everybody would understand what we're talking about.
Well, for us, and the way it applies for just SWAT in general, a lot of SWAT teams have been doing it for a long time this way. It's a matrix, it's a threat matrix. And what it is, it takes in factors, and a lot of it is either dealing with the suspect that you're going after, or suspects, and then the location that you're going to. There's inherent issues with all that. Is this person is he wanted for murder, or is he wanted for burglary? What's his career been like? Has he got a lot of violent felonies? Is he known to run? Has he shot at people? Is he carrying weapons? Is he, all these things that can go into him, and then you have the location itself as far as, is it heavily fortified? Is it upstairs apartment? How barricaded is it? There's a camera. Where is it on the block? Is it in the corner? Is it in the middle of the block? Is there an alley? And all these different, factors that go along in it that contribute to the plan on, okay, how difficult is this mission, and how much resources and assets do you need to bring to bear to solve it? And say, this is a upstairs apartment, one window, one door, or is this it's a duplex that has 4 doors on it, and they've kicked out the wall in between. They have access to both of it, because we see that. And so you're like, it's not necessarily always the size of the structure, it's the complexity of it that has a lot to do with it. And so some of those duplexes are not a large structure, but you got 4 doors coming into the house that can get you anywhere in it. There's a lot of bigger homes that don't even have that. And so you have all those factors, and so looking around the country, there was a lot of different renditions out there, and a lot of them were, you got to build a point system up, and people's math gets fuzzy sometimes when they're adding points up, and who's going to be responsible for performing that warrant and all these things. And I reached out to a lot of guys, and he's retired now, Mike Odell, for LAPD SWAT, great guy. He was in SWAT for a long time, and he promoted up, and I think he retired as a captain earlier this year. But I reached out to Mike and said, hey, what do y'all do out there? And he goes, well, this is how we do it. I'll send you everything in email. He sent me this, and not that we do it that way, but it was really a professional way that they had been doing it for a long time out there, as far as how they assess. And not that we weren't doing the same thing, we just really weren't capturing it and recording it that way. I mean, our guys were doing the exact same thing they were doing. It was captured, and it was more of it was documented, much better job than what we had been doing. And so I was like, we can do a better job of this. Well, I crafted my first one, and I asked, many people, ran it through Tim multiple times. I talked to Claggett about it, because Claggett did a lot of, by the time he's retired, and he was training around the country and asking him on different things, and ran it through I ran it through multiple senior guys that had done a lot of work, and they had come up with different ways of looking at it. I just kept working on it, and changing little nuances here and there, and kept getting turned down. And I had a deputy chief tell me one time, and goes, why would I want to put something like that on paper and paint ourselves into a corner? And I was like,
we do with everything else.
I mean, when has the Dallas Police Department never put anything on paper? It was like, I was stunned by that, and it was the deputy chief that said that. And he's retired, but he was over us for the time. And he was just like, no. He goes, what we have in place in general orders is sufficient. I'm like, it barely discusses it. And
it's general.
It's general, yeah.
General
well,
orders.
yeah. And I was like, but there's nothing really specific. I was like, we can do a lot better job at this, and we need to. And if something ever comes up, and you hate to say when, but it's a big city, things happen here. When something bad happens, that's one of the first things we're going to start looking at. How did you plan this? How was it decided to do this tactic versus that? What is your training on that? And so when all that started coming up, people are like, well, I think it's a good idea, but we've never done it here, so why do it? Why we do it? And I just kept working on it. And it took, probably the first time that I started it till the time it probably got approved, up the chain, probably took almost 10 years.
Yeah, like you said, though, if something goes bad, and something's always going to come to the Dallas doorstep. It always has.
Yeah.
Look at our history, okay?
Sure.
And we got much more coming our way, I'm sure. If something goes wrong, they start looking down the chain of the planning, the preparation, and they're going to try to, in some cases, could try to point a finger.
Yeah. Well,
you don't want to be that one, the finger pointing at you.
Anytime anything goes wrong, one of the first thing they do is pull up training records. Mm-hmm. It's the first thing they're going to do, and whether it be the department or attorneys or the courts, whatever, they're going to do that. And when you start looking at documentation, it's like, well, we're not documenting how we're doing any of this. We were doing it, but it just wasn't. And believe me, I'm not one to make paperwork for ourselves, but I think it was recognized that we need to do a better job about it. And when now Major Villarreal, when he came back over as a lieutenant, ran it by him again, and kind of he's like, you know what, I think I see what we need to do here, and he really championed the cause and sent it up. And at the time, Major Igo, now Assistant Chief Igo, went with that and goes, hey, we're going to go forward with this and we're going to implement it. And now it is, I guess a year or so ago, they say we're doing this, and they, of course, as usual, they're going to tweak it a little bit what they wanted to do, but they implemented it. And I just thought it was something that we needed to do a long time ago. We finally got it done, but anyway, that's what it was. So I took a lot of pride in trying to get that done. I thought it was the best thing for us, and I just think that at the end of the day, you're trying to make things safer for everybody. That's what I was trying to do.
The matrix basically tallies up the different aspects of what's going on with this warrant, and then it determines, does it get run by our patrol guys, our CRT guys, our crime response teams, the gang unit, or does it need to go all the way up to the level of the SWAT team executing it?
Yeah, it's a threat assessment, and it's a guide to help guide the detectives on looking at what's going on, because obviously they know about that location long before we ever do. And they go, hey, this guy is low I hate to say that low level, because that doesn't really mean anything, but hey, there's no expectation of some kind of resistance or whatever. This is something that can be done on this level, because obviously you can't roll a SWAT team every time somebody gets arrested, because obviously you can't do that either. But there has to be some kind of line in the sand saying this is where it ends, this is where it's going to be taken to. And we just brought everything collectively together to a point, in much more of in documenting to saying, hey, this is how we're going to do it, this is what we're going to do, and do that. And I think in a general, it probably eased some of their concerns, because they're like, hey, this is what we need to do, as opposed to saying, well, maybe we should do it, maybe we shouldn't. It's much more black and white now.
Yeah, it takes the
decision making
away from the people that are closely involved, and says, hey, no, I know you want to do it, but reaches a different level to where it needs to be good.
Yeah, absolutely.
He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight. Talk about your experiences with the 6 a.m. warrants and suspects shooting at the team a lot, and then how the decisions went to getting away from early or late warrants.
Well, when I came over, again, in 2005, we ran warrants all the time, early morning into late at night. And we'll get 2 units that were different times of the day, not like it is now where we're all together. And on day shift, on days, you work 6A to 4P and then 1P to 11P on the evenings, and you flip-flopped every month. And so it was nothing for the other unit to be running a warrant at 6 or 7 a.m. while you were not there, or you'd be running one at 9 p.m. while they're – so all those different – the variances and the extremes of hours, we did a lot of it back then. Or not a lot, but it happened quite often. And so when February 2006, I hadn't been here a year yet, Oak Park happened. And it was an early morning warrant for a federal, task force thing. And it was just like every other time, there's multiple warrants going on at the same time. And we had been asked to run that one. And as a new guy, you don't have anything to do with it. You're just out training and doing whatever. So you come in and, the plan's on the board. And again, something that we have done in Dallas SWAT that I'll say that is much better is our attention to detail and the process we do about briefing and planning warrants. It is much better than it was when I first came over. And not to say those guys were doing a bad job. It's just kind of like we just realized we need to do a better job.
Yeah, it evolved.
It evolved, absolutely. And so that one was not planned great. It had some holes in it, and it was missing some critical information that should have been, handled and discovered and dealt with on the plan. It wasn't. But that still didn't change necessarily everything would happen. And we had... it went bad that day. A lot of officers, got hit, got shot, and the emergency action, immediate action drills, whatever you want to call them, from us did not go right as well. We had some bad things happen, and it was no question, it is a red letter date in the history of Dallas SWAT. It's not a good thing, certainly. And it was when you got done with that, and then the senior leadership that was there is like, we got to change things. We cannot continue to do this. We got to do things better. Hack's still limping today because of that. That was 2006. And we looked at ourselves, which is nobody wants to do that, but you look at yourselves like, we got to do everything better from now going forward. And doesn't help, those guys that got shot that day. But if anything out of it, we got better at what we were doing, or we started the process of getting better, and it's still evolving today, trying to get better. But it was a bad deal, and so that happened. And then you go, that was in 2006, and then you moved to October in 2007 when Lieutenant Carlton Marshall was shot. And I was standing, just arm's length away from him when that happened. And again, there was deficiencies in the plan, the way it was implemented. Not that anybody was not trying to do a good job. There were some command and control issues that were above any of our say so, that led to that. And we came within a whisper of dying. And Dr. Alex Eastman and Dr. Jeff Metzger, what they did in that driveway, performing an emergency tracheotomy and save that man's life, is just still unbelievable to think about what they did.
Yeah, we've had Dr. Metzger's episode air already, and Dr. Eastman's is upcoming, and it's phenomenal to hear both perspectives of that.
Well, I mean, even for those that don't know, he got shot in the neck at very close range with a 45 Sig P220. She's an 19-year-old woman, holding a 8-month-old baby, shot him through the window and hit him in the neck, and it clipped his spine. And he was just, I can't how bad a shape he was in.
He probably would not have survived the SWAT doctors.
Well, they'll tell you that the ambulance, if he'd have been in the ambulance when he got shot, he probably would not have survived, because they can't do what those trauma ER surgeons did. And so it's absolutely, again, those guys, to do that in the driveway while we're still running the warrant, those are steady hands right there, man. Those guys are unbelievable. And so we kid those guys, but man,
flashlights in their mouth.
Yeah.
And hands working in the dark.
And they weren't officers back then. They weren't armed. They stayed in.
And it was an active scene.
We were still.
Got to continue.
Josh Hertel and those guys drug Lieutenant Marshall back to them. Tim and I stayed at the window and were confronting him as the entry team was coming into the house. We saw her. She shot him and dropped the gun immediately. And the gun was right inside the window by the headboard of the bed. We couldn't see it. It was just within a foot or so of us. We just couldn't see it way down the bed because she just shot him and just dropped the gun. So you're confronting him, who was going for the gun, but the covers had flipped over the gun, and he could feel the 45, his 45, under the covers. He just couldn't grasp it because the covers were over it. She shot him with another 45 and dropped the gun by the bed, on the headboard, and he didn't know that. And so we were confronting him. He had shot himself in the leg with an AK the year before, and so he was hopping around on one leg trying to find the gun. We're confronting him and her, and the baby screaming, she's screaming, and none of us knew at the time that she's been the one that had shot him. And so after that, it was like, hey, we just had this happen last year on Oak Park, and now we have this on 1110 Hollywood's where that happened. They're like, we're going to go back and reevaluate running warrants at early in the morning at dark. And whether it's the darkness, it was just, hey, as a practice, we're just not going to do warrants, dynamic, no-knock warrants at 6 a.m. anymore when people were probably still in bed. That was what was the decision. Whether it was the right thing or not, that was the decision to be made, and we stopped running them dynamically. No knocks down. Now we can go out and do surrounding call-outs, but that's a whole nother animal there. So we try to just wait to let them go later in the day so we can run them dynamically, so we don't have those issues. But those are the two big things that happen. So you're back to your question about that. That's what came up out of that, and changed the way we do it ever since 2007.
Now, at your level as an ASL, have you come across any of the static from the federal agencies that like running those 6 a.m. warrants?
Oh yeah, no, in the present day 2022 administration, they're not allowed to perform those anymore. Anyway, they could do it themselves back then, and then they would always ask us to help them out as far as manpower because they always had multiple locations. They can't run dynamic anymore on a federal level, so they're more than happy to come and ask us to do it because they know that we need certain structures need to be done that way. Yet they want to run them at 6 a.m. And so it's like, okay.
Still not decreasing the number of times they get into shootings on these 6 a.m. warrants,
right.
However they're doing it.
Yeah, so they're not doing it anymore, yet they still have a high rate of, use of force, deadly force encounters, much more than us. So is it the operators or is it the plan? And so I would suggest to you that it's more of an operational level issue than it is a plan issue. You can have great plan and still have bad operators, and then maybe you're lucky if it goes some, but you can have a bad plan and great operators can sometimes pull that thing
Yep.
out. So it's there's no question in my mind, again, not to sit there and pick on them, but having dealt with them enough to know that sometimes they don't know what they're asking. And I think what happens is they come in and go, I'm like, look, if you could do this, you would do it. You need us to do this. We're going to do it the way we think is right. And it's the only way you can do it, is to do it the way you think you need to do it, depending on what your capabilities are as a department. I wouldn't want to tell somebody else how to do it because I don't know how they do things.
So Sun Tzu also says victorious warriors win first and then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first and then seek to win. Talk about your mentality towards preparation. I mean, both operationally and personally. You're one of those dudes that probably has your outfit, your underwear's set up by date for sure. Your socks all match and everything's pretty squared away in your life.
I don't know if I have them done by date, but they're lined up, so it's
Ironed.
Starch, yeah.
Well, the new ones you can't starch them, so
But those old good ones, yeah.
Yeah. And I know people gave us. I don't care what they think, but I think that I think it matters. And again, being raised while I was raised, my mom, it's brutal. She's an English major. You talk about living with that. Everything's proper, and you will say it correctly, and you don't just grammar and all that. And it was like, you're going to be prepared. There wasn't any just waking up and just being this. It was just, and then growing up back to East Texas, like that equipment will not be ready in the morning unless you prepped it the night before. You have to service that equipment, and that's anybody knows anything about balers and brush hogs and all that. It required a tremendous amount of maintenance and having to prepare them. And you just can't just put them up at night and jump back on the next day. They're not going to last you long. And so you got to prepare. So for the next day is prepare the night before. And I think that's a big thing here. When you're getting called out in the middle of the night, time is money. You don't have time to where is this? I have seen many guys, waist deep inside their boxes or their trunks trying to find a certain piece of gear they need. I'm like, man, we don't have time, And so I'm like, you're born with inherent attributes, whether you're tall or strong or fast or, they're better shooters than this, but they're not going to outwork you. You got to out hustle people. And so I'd always try to be that guy that, whatever, to have my stuff ready, and if, when we show up, I'm gonna be right there getting dressed, ready to go out the door, can get to where I'm going, grab my gear and be up there quick. Not that people can't be quicker than you or whatever, but you got to be streamlined. You got to be efficient. And so when you talk about preparing, having your gear laid out, having it ready, making sure your batteries are charged on your radios, having extra batteries. I know people give me grief about that, but man, let me tell you something. You got to have all that ready to go. And how all that money we spend on training you and all this great gear, and you don't have what you need as a battery, and it fulls operation. Just little things like that. So I think it's those little things that require no great aptitude. It's just effort. And so having your gear ready, being prepared is a big thing. And I have been on the receiving end of a lot of things go my way just because you were quick to it. And being prepared, not necessarily just in equipment, but mentally being prepared about how to work this. And you're driving in for the warrant, or we're getting called out in the middle of the night, and it's a HR, and you got to get there. It's not just driving there, then going, okay, what do I need to do? You're already working through all those intangibles, and all those possible outcomes while you're getting there. Hey, is this? Is it? You see the apartment number on it. You're like, is it upstairs? Is it downstairs? Is there another door to it? Where's the windows? What's the approach? Is there cameras there? Is there lighting? Do we need to evac the common wall people out of there? Which is, we have to do that a lot. So all those things are happening. So when you hit the ground at the scene, you're not going, okay, what am I doing? You're already working through all those, and you're paying attention to the radio, hearing what other people are saying or whatever. So when you get there, I'm not at step 2 or 3. I'm already at step number 8 or 9, and I'm already at number 15 trying to work through that problem. And so when you see that, you're like, okay, I know exactly what to do. Back talking about earlier about doing that training, about doing that prep, I know what the idea is, how to solve this problem already. So all you got to do is figure out what the problem is. I already got the file ready to go. You just lay it down there and go. And that's how people win.
So this is getting into something that's kind of triggered a memory for me. And I don't know if I've told you, Joe, this story, but there's a police agency in Texas that I think came to one of the first HR schools Matt put on, or maybe it was an advanced SWAT or something, and they really liked the training, and they've been coming back for a lot of the training that we do for the TTPOA, specifically the ones that Matt heads up. And so they've developed some camaraderie with the Dallas SWAT team a little bit. We recognize them and we know them by first name and stuff, but Matt has these isms or axioms or sayings, and they were pretty quick to pick up on it, especially after their third or fourth training course with us. So one training course, they all showed up with T-shirts. And I found a picture of the T-shirt, and I'll show this to you. Maybe you can post this up, but I'll read what on the back said. It says, batteries, mechanical offset, white light, handle the room, don't get left in Virginia, Matt Smith. So there are all the isms there. But, Matt, I want you to touch on one, and that's the last one, which is don't get left in Virginia.
I got that from the book No Easy Day. And if anybody hasn't read that book, Mark Owen, he was a Navy SEAL, and he wrote that book about his firsthand account of being on the Osama bin Laden raid mission. And I like reading these books, whatever. I enjoy them, And again, it's not necessarily saying their tactics are ours, but it's the mindset. So you think about this: they're already Navy SEALs. Okay, so they're already accomplished much more than
tip of the spear.
Yeah, but people do. And then you have SEAL Team 6, which is even more exclusive. I mean, they're and having met all this, look, any SEAL's done more than I ever have, especially the SEAL Team 6 guys. But anyway, so you have guys that are on SEAL Team 6, and they are looked at amongst their peers as being that elite tip of the spear. Like, you have the number of the SEALs, and you have a smaller number of those guys. And it's like the unit, the Delta guys, they are SEAL Team 6 and the unit guys are considered by pretty much everybody in the world as the two most elite. And, and the guys from SEAL Team 6 go to the unit, so the unit probably is even more elite and more prestigious. But anyway, so the book, Marco and No Easy Day, they are doing it, and they have rotations about who's up and all that. And so they have, and I don't know what the number of the guys are, and that number is their number, but let's just say there's a lot of guys that are in that group. But when this mission came down the pipe and they decided they were going to go look at this, they're in Dam Neck, Virginia as they're training. And so they come in, and the command comes in and goes, okay, we're only taking like 24 guys on this mission. This is the mission of all missions for this generation. So you think about that. They're going to go try to take out Osama bin Laden. I mean, just, public enemy number one. And so the command starts looking at guys, and they're like, who are we going to take on this mission? Because they all can't go. And the ones that aren't going can't know what's happening. And the ones that are going to go train, and the ones that are not going to go are going to get left in Virginia. And that's what he talks about. It's like, and so when you are training, which is where all this comes from, and being able to be a professional and doing your job, is that you're putting all that collateral and all that going forward. Is like, I'm here, I'm a solid dude, I'm training, I'm doing my job, I'm a solid dude, I'm an asset, I'm doing what's expected of me, what's asked of me, and I go out there and perform that at a high level regularly, where the command and all my guys have confidence in me. That's what you got to be able to do. I don't care if you're the newest guy or the most senior guy. That's the litmus test right there. Do your people have trust in you? So when you calms up and say whatever, they're like, yep, that's what you need to do. And so you think about how hard that must have been, because they're already SEAL Team 6, and they had to go in there and pick out those guys to be that small group to go to Abbottabad, Pakistan, to take him out. And so I can't imagine what the feelings were with that. I'm sure some of them were probably, I wish I could have gone. And I know I was listening to O'Neill talk about it. He's like, there are some guys that go, hey, I want to be the next time that mission comes up, I want to be on that chopper. I'm going to work better. And so I always tell those guys, hey, don't get left in Virginia. So basically, don't be the guy that nobody trusts or has confidence in. Be that guy. They go, hey, we got to go do this mission. So like if they came in here today and go, hey, we got a cell we got to go take down. We only can get 8 guys, and this is, breaking it down. We only can take 8 SWAT guys up there. Who 8 are you going to take? Don't get left in Virginia. So that's where that comes from. So
I love it.
Yeah. So they made that T-shirt, and I faded some heat. I did not know that somebody here knew they were going to be making those shirts and wearing them. So when they rolled in that day, and they all took their tops off, and Yeah, it was a long day.
I can't imagine the Feld smile you had just looking at that. You shot your wheels off trying to train?
Well, it was hard. I did good because they weren't with my group first, and so I was able to get kind of in my world over there. But when they rotated back to us and having to watch them walk in, just looking at that, it was hard. And then now they have another one out too, so it's funny.
I haven't seen this one.
Version 2.
But I think
Electric Boogaloo.
I appreciate.
I didn't say it this time, Danny.
But I appreciate their effort because, hey, it's a daunting task to come up here as a small time team and then come up here and then walk into the lion's den and to fade that heat from us, and yet they continuously do it. So they're really good dudes. I like those guys.
We have guys on our team who are like, oh, what's going on this week? And we're like, we got this going on, this. And then Matt's up in North training. They're teaching this, and the guys will be like, oh, I'm going to go to that to just sit and listen to Matt just wear these guys out, because there's a lot of humor in it, too. Everyone knows the Matt Smith axioms are
iron sharpens iron, right? I mean, you're up there, you're doing that to make them better and possibly save their life.
Yeah.
I mean, people say, oh, he's a hard ass. I've heard that about you. I've heard you're a hard ass trainer, but I believe, and I'm not even, you've never trained me. I know you actually have in some of our on the CRT stuff, Danny. He was part of that. But you're doing that and you're a hard ass for a reason to keep me alive. That's how I looked at it.
Or there's a reason why those guys made those shirts.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think if you're a professional, you want to work with other professionals. And so you want to find out really quick who wants to do the job. And that's one good thing about SWAT as a whole. Guys that want to go to training, they want to do really good, but every now and then you'll get somebody that comes in, and they're like, I've got to be here. And it's hard. You're like, try to be professional, but I don't want them to walk out of there and not become better. And so you're like, the only way I know to do that is to be brutally honest with you.
Yeah.
Because I can tell, I had Mike Keating, we had guys over here, even though Keating wasn't necessarily all the training, like they were very direct about things. Not all of them. But at the same time, they would tell you that's dumb. Don't ever do that again. And so that resonates versus,
tiptoeing around a serious situation.
Yeah, because if you didn't make the team, you didn't make the team. It wasn't like it is. Like a lot of things now is like, okay, well, everybody's going to get a participation trophy. That's not the way it works. So you got to be direct with them.
Nobody has really escaped Matt's wrath either. So at one point in time, you've done something that you wish you didn't do, especially right in front of Matt, and there is a large amount of joy that you take in watching him just dress somebody else down, and it's not you at that time.
Carl, where's your rifle?
That's a pry.
He took years off my life. Good dude, but again, you try to leave it. One thing Todd Wellhouse told me, if you don't know Freaky, he's a good dude. He said, leave it better than when you got here. And I think we've done that to some degree. I think they all have. We've really pushed a lot of good stuff and equipment and all this.
That's a huge challenge.
It is.
I mean, I think everyone who is really good at their job says that to the next guys coming in, and it puts a lot on them. It's like, leave it better than
especially when nostalgia kicks in and you realize that all those dudes were 10 feet tall and had lasers out of their eyes. And, they were just a different breed than the guys that we have now. And it's going to continue to evolve. And I think that their lack of technology and their lack of equipment almost made them sharper.
Yeah.
And now that we have more of the equipment and more of the stuff, we don't necessarily do all the same things that they did because they had to.
Yeah. Well, I'm a firm believer in software over hardware. You can have all the great equipment, but if you can't, you can put a jet in front of me, I can't do anything with it. You got to know how to do it. And those guys, even though we have more equipment than they ever had, there's no, like the night vision, everything we have, those guys have been gone like 10, 7, almost 8 years. All the equipment we've got since he left, he and I have talked about this many times. He's like, that's incredible that y'all have all that with the APCs, the drones. We got 2 brand new I-cores last week, which, those are, to have that. When I came over, the robot hadn't even work. The APCs didn't run. We used the vans. We hid in the street on BPs because we didn't have any armor. That's just unfathomable to think about now. We have 5 now, and so there's always one in the shop for some reason. Keith ran over a fence or something, so we always have one down. But hey, Keith's great. I love Keith. But anyway, but you've got to have that. At the same time, those guys ran 300 to 400 warrants a year back then. It's just different. And so, I will never run as many warrants as they did. But the new generation will never run as much as I did because I was kind of on the tail end of that. My generation, we caught 200-300 warrants. 300. The whole division probably ran. I've run 160, something like that a year for many years. They'll never do that many. All these guys every year. It's just it takes more time, more process, and all that. They just want, not that they couldn't do it. It just won't happen that way. So they had so many more reps, and they had burnt a lot of training scars down trying to get past all that. And they're like, I can tell you right now, 100%, that is wrong. That is because we've done it wrong for a long time. Don't ever do it that way again. Or they're like, look, and it's the basic CQB stuff that was taught years ago still works today. So
real quick, CQB, tell the listener what that is.
Close quarters battle.
Thank you.
That's another acronym.
Yep, we use a lot of them.
Yeah.
Sir will be emailing me asking what that is. Hey, real quick, I have a question on the training aspect. So you have trained so many different SWAT operators within the city, within smaller agencies across the country. You've seen SWAT operators evolve with their talents that are given to them, and you've also showed them things that they could tailor their performance to what skill set they have. You've watched that evolution of an individual. What is your opinion on seeing an operator devolve over time? What goes into that? Was it job complacency? Could it be entitlement? What do you see the biggest factor when it comes to that, people devolving in their SWAT career?
I think you could look at many contributing factors to that, and I think that's in any job. Matter of fact, when you asked that, I wrote it down. I said, any business is commonplace in any business to have a letdown somewhere, or like you said, de-evolve, or to taper off. I think to some degree, I think that's just human nature, which is wrong because we can't allow that here. If you sell insurance for a living, and you don't write as many as you did a few years ago, is it really going to change your safety in your life?
You may not have somebody shot in the throat on the side of a house.
Right, yeah. And so over here, you have to recognize that whatever that line in the sand is, when you get to it, you got to be honest with yourself and say, hey, I'm there. There's no shame in that. And everybody has a different line. There are some people who've done this job, Tim, and those guys are at a high level. When he left, he was still doing it at a high level for over 20 years. That is not easy. I've been doing it over 17. Man, it is work.
And it's an outlier, too.
Well,
just a department.
It's work, but you've got to be committed. Like, you got to wake up, pretty much every 4 out of 5 days a week and go, hey, I'm in this thing. And you got to go work. And whether the weather's bad or it's really hot, or the call out comes, you're just like, you can't sit there and go, no, it didn't work that way.
Yeah, there's really not an option to stay in bed when the phone goes off.
No, you got to go. And even, and not that it was before, but even now when we're basically all on call all the time because we're so small and it's just so much, it's just so involved with the equipment and everything that we need. Rarely do everybody get called on everything. And so just to label one thing, to say this is what happens, there's a multitude of things. It could be personal, where, their personal life could be doing this. It could be physical. It could be a thing where, hey, this guy's made a lot of money on the side doing whatever else. And he's like, hey, I just may be starting to shut down. Hey, that's fine. There's no shame in that. Everybody's got to have their own way. I have seen young people come in, young guys, and not just, with Dallas SWAT, from other agencies, and they are stunned by everything that goes into this job. They think we all get to work out, and look cool and drive all the gear and shoot and all that.
Take all the selfies with the equipment.
Yeah, and all do all that. And though that's there, man, that's just the wrapping on the pack. Like, it is so much past, and I don't want to sound whatever, but it's absolutely what it is. And so
the wrapping on the pad, that's the most East Texas thing you've said today.
Well, I had to get it in there.
Shoehorn it in.
Yeah, I got to get it in there. So, but you have to recognize that, man, this thing is dimensional. It is very evolving. It's like a rabbit hole almost when you go down it, and you got to be committed to stay with it, because when you leave the department, this thing just keeps trucking, right? It don't ever stop.
Ball bounces.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with us. And look, there was some guys that were giants on Dallas SWAT when I came over. Those were the dudes. When I came over, you're like, everything runs through them. They are.
What are some of those folks' names? Give them a shout out.
Well, Tim, no doubt, Tim Houston. As far as in our side, you had Bodie Sarton, who was another ASL over there with us. Todd Wellhouse was there for many years. Chuck Del Tufo, those guys. And then you had Steve Claggett, Steve Salaya. You had Robert Cockrell, those guys in the A unit, they were the big dogs. They were the senior guys they were those pillars of our division that they knew what was going on. And everybody went through them for everything, and it's supposed to be that. Those are your senior guys, and all of them are gone. And you know what? This thing, and that's nothing against them. This thing does not stop moving. And when Danny and I are gone, this thing will keep on rolling. It's back to what he mentioned earlier. It's like you want to leave it better. You want to try to put in place things that when you do leave, and I can tell you right now, I'm a perfect example of that as far as I hear myself all the time saying things that those guys said, and, especially with Tim. And he's like, you got to learn the fundamentals. And one of the things that Paul Howe says, and I think it's a great quote, is the definition of high speed is being able to perform the basics on demand. And that is very, very true. And Tim didn't really say it in those words, but that's what he said all the time. He's like, you're no good to me or to us if you can go out there and shoot 100 by 38, whatever X count, but I can't trust you not to go the wrong way or to do something dumb or to yell out going up a set of stairs and confronting people and scaring everybody in there and tipping everything off. Like the thinking man's game. And so when we talk about, people losing that, you have to in order to lose it, you had to have had it. And so I don't think some people ever really get that, to be honest with you. And I think that's in every division, every department, not just Dallas. Mm-hmm. You have people that carry that division that do a great job and make things happen in wherever they are, and you have people that are just kind of there. And so I see that with a problem with a lot of the smaller agencies, and it's not their fault. They just have lack of experience and just examples of what learn to do. And you try to set that standard and try to be a benchmark for them to say, it's not just me, but just Dallas. Look, these are the minimum things you need to work on. I have many guys get done these these classes that we do, or even from the conference, and they email me, could you send me the lesson plan? Could you send me 8 things you think we need to work on this? And I appreciate it because they care. A lot of guys just come in there like, hey, I'm out of here. Here's
check the box.
Check the box. I did my critique, and I'm gone because they wanted to get their hours of TCOL. And look, you're not going to be able to change them. The guys that you want to help are the ones that are looking for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if you're training 10 people and 2 people reach out, pull you to the side at the end of class or in between breaks and want to talk to you, that's worth it.
Yeah,
that's worth it right there.
Yeah, there's no question.
Because they actually give a shit.
Yeah.
They want to be better and they want to make everybody around them better.
Yeah, you just want to be that guy that can help out. No question.
Speaking of which, being able to help out, back to Sun Tzu, he said, opportunities multiply as they are seized. Now, you've got experience in just about every aspect of SWAT. You've trained in just about every specialty we have. Number one, how did that happen? And number two, what was your favorite part of that and why?
Well, that's a great question. When I came over,
thank you.
We were specialized in the sense that you had the negotiators were grouped together in their own squad. The snipers were grouped together in their own squad. Then you had the entry teams that were their own squad. And they just you were kind of like a hired gun in the sense that they needed you for personnel. You would go with them. But on a call out, that was your assignment. It wasn't who's primary, who's up. It was like if you were a sniper, that's what you deployed at if it was needed. And I came over as a sniper, and that was the way it was. So on the vast majority of call outs early in my career, you deployed as a sniper. And so you do that. I did that for many years. Became a gas and less lethal guy because when they realigned us into where every cell or every squad is now inherently has all your specialties inside it, became a gas and less lethal guy. I did that for many years. And I was about the busiest guy in the department. Was a gas guy, especially on a call out like a BP. Been a ballistic breacher, shotgun breaching. I've had that for years. When we first went with the HAT team, the high angle team for the rappels, when we first got the first rappel bags, I did that for years because I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun and cool, and you wanted to learn something you'd never done before. I mean, there's something I knew how to tie up horses and do things like that, but I had never done anything like that. So learning the knots and knowing how to tie off and do things like that, it was a struggle to try and learn all those knots and everything. But I liked it because heights don't really bother me that bad. I'm comfortable with them, so it was fun. I enjoyed it. The explosive breaching, I wanted to go to the schools so I could become better understanding what the guys were saying on when we're getting ready to prep something. I have never gone up and set a charge on a live op, and I don't do that. I could, I guess technically if I went through and kind of refreshed myself. But there's a lot of guys that were doing that, and they were already ahead of me. And I was like, you know what? Those guys do a great job. I don't want to upset that. I went through the school. I went through CT school in Garland. I went through Chris Cherry school with us because I wanted to know what the information was. So when any of these guys comes up and go, this is what we got, I have a good expectation of what it is, and I helps me plan the warrant or the operation better, or have a better expectation of what's going to happen when this thing goes off. So I did that just so I could be better at my job. It wasn't that I was going to start carrying, and being an explosive breacher. So I've done all those different specialties. I still have a shotgun, ballistic breaching shotgun. I used it on that deal we did with the big studio a couple months ago, where I helped on one of those. So I don't want to be a jack of all trades, master nothing, but it helps to have a good foundation based in good sound tactics in those different specialties. So when you are up trying to come up with a plan, you've done it. You know what a 40 millimeter can do. You know what a ballistic breach can do. You know what the snipers are capable of doing. Like, hey, those guys can get over there and probably give us good overwatch, because I've done that job. And so I think that really helps me as a whole understand the whole operation as just moving fluid. And I just think she makes you just being able to not just be so locked in on one thing that you're doing. You're able to encompass the whole thing better and just make you more efficient, if that makes sense.
So what's your favorite?
My favorite specialty?
Yeah, what did you like doing the most?
I enjoy them all.
Nope, pick one.
That's a good one. I'm not really sure I've had a favorite one. They all, I'll take
the zoo rifle.
Well, the zoo rifle was
100%.
Yeah, the zoo rifle was fun. Well, I can tell you.
He's just sitting here holding it right now as he's talking.
I'm going to thank Claggett for that later. 'Cause but I can tell you this, being a sniper early on, you learn fundamentals of marksmanship. And that was great in just learning how to become a better shooter. Not just pulling the trigger, and qualling with your entry gun, but being a sniper and learning fundamentals and being a better shooter with that was a big thing. And then when we go out on operations, I still had the zoo gun, at the same time. I don't know if I had a favorite. Just I don't know. I think all of them had their own place. The 40 millimeter was fun for a long time, doing all that. But I've had the shotgun for longer than anything. So I guess I'll just say ballistic breaching.
Just because it was there the longest.
Just because it's been there the longest.
Okay, yeah. Makes perfect sense. Treat your men as you would your own beloved sons, and they will follow you into the deepest valley. Discuss your role of being the ASL and selecting personnel, and kind of get into why you choose the people that you choose.
Well, as we talked about earlier, it's a big responsibility. It's not just an element number or the letters behind your name. To whom much is given, much is expected. And so they give you, if you I don't say give it, you earn it. I think if you get that job because you've earned it or somebody believes that you do, when you're in that role, you have to recognize that at any moment the operation could come down just to you. You got to be willing to accept that. And that was just the other day on Market Center, the one we had up off of 35. That thing happened quick. And there was just a few of us up there, and and I wasn't the only one up there, and lots of people were there saying the exact same thing I was thinking. So it wasn't like I was the one who thought it, but you got to recognize you may be that guy up there. And so you have to understand that it's a big responsibility. I don't take it lightly. And, I had a great one to learn from in Tim, and do I do everything Zach would say? No, you don't. You take what your mentors, leadership shows you how to do it, and you apply it the way you think it should be done. But no question, my game is patterned after his. I learned a lot from so many other different guys that you just pick and choose little things. I think that the responsibility to, not that you're going to have all the answers right away, but you know how to get there really quick. I think that's the big part about being the ASL, because you have experience. You have that. Tom Brady is not one of the greatest quarterbacks because of his great arm, being able to run around, do all that. Because why? He can read defenses, and he may not be doing too good this year, but as a whole, he's done it really well because he has experience. He knows there's not a defense they're going to throw at him that he can't figure out. I think this is kind of the same thing here. You know how to get to those questions or those answers really quick. As being part as far as selection, I think anybody that's in a position to try to help select personnel for you should be looking at who do you believe to be the right person. And there's a saying that the unit guys had. They said, we don't pick the best person, we pick the right person. I think that's, people say, oh, what's the difference there, or what is that? I think it's a great quote. When you're somewhere in the business of selecting personnel, I think you get that, because if you're looking at something that's on a piece of paper, it's very, you're just like, well, what is his PT? What is his shooting? What are his measurables? And I use this analogy. Look at the NFL draft. You have guys who've been playing football their whole life, in college at a high level, and the NFL spends a exorbitant amount of money evaluating these guys. And yet, you look at the average of the first-round draft picks, about 4 or 5 years, most of them are gone. There's very few of them last a whole long time. And that is probably – I challenge you to find somebody that's more scrutinized than a first-round draft pick for the NFL. So they have a lot more scrutiny about them. They look at those measurables, their height, weight, bench press, 40-time, vertical, and all that. And though we look at some of those things too on the PT test, it's between the ears is what matters. I look here. And I've said this many times when we're evaluating guys to come over here, I look at, is the PT test a struggle for them? And if they're not struggling, I really don't worry about it too much more. As long as he's just where you're like, man, every 6 months that dude's gonna have trouble. You can't worry about that. But as long as you can get him over here and get him in shape, I'm like, hey, I'm not, don't worry about it. As long as that's within reason. Or they just barely make, So you have to look at those kind of things. I look at between their ears and how when they're walking in between, if somebody drops something, do they pick it up for them, or they help them out, or are they so self-centered where like I will let you fail just so I can look better, or things like that. And those are the things that I'm looking at. Not just me. A lot of people look at that. But those are the kinds of things I'm looking at. And these guys know this. I start calling around like, who knows that dude that works with him? And they're like, Joe knows him. He works South Central deep nights. I'm like, find somebody in that detail or on that watch that knows that you trust, that has an evaluation of the guy. And not that you take that for 100%, but you just building that folder up on that guy and you're looking at him and you're just taking it in. And I think if you put effort into it, you're looking at those guys and you got like, I need somebody that's going to come over here that understands that, hey, you have no say so. You got to learn how to do this job. We will take great care of you. We will teach you stuff that nobody else will, but you got to realize there's a process. And
I think everyone on the team knows, and we've seen it, how you've picked people for your squad over the years, is, and you just said it, you're not necessarily picking the best person, you're picking the right person. And you might have someone who's the fastest, shoots the best, actually almost did the best in the tryout with everything else that in the school that we put him through, but you're looking for something that is the best fit and mold for the type of person you're looking for your squad. It may even be a specific role on your squad. And I think we've all recognized that over the years, that's how you pick people, and it ends up working out very well for you and your squad.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's a lot of effort that I put into that, and again, not just me, a lot of people do, and it's not just, going on. I talk to a lot of people, and bounce ideas off of them, and but the last guy since being the ASL and having a say so in that, because before that you didn't, you just sat there and go, okay, that's who we're taking.
You have to be a talent scout.
Well, basically. Yeah, you do. Yeah, but at the same time, it's a talent scout, but you got to have just what Danny's talking about. You got to have those inner workings about what you're looking for and what you need. Mm-hmm. And
from the outside looking in, it's almost like you're trying to pick a new family member.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's really what it turns into. I mean, we're not as big as we once were in Dallas. You've got
absolutely
9 guys with you if you're full.
Yeah.
But
you're never full.
But you spend at least 40 hours a week with that group. Yeah. And upwards of.
You eat more meals and spend more time with your eyes closed with the guys than you do your own family.
No question.
And that's difficult to explain to the command staff when you're wanting somebody that you personally observed, but all they see is the numbers on the paper. Yeah. And so you're saying, no, this is the guy that fits in with the group that I already have. This is what's going to make this thing work well. Yeah. And I don't know, they don't really get you in those conversations too much. That's usually something a sergeant has to try to explain. But it's huge. It's very important. You, like you said, you'll have the guys that just kill everything else, but they're about themselves. Yeah. Or they just don't grasp the concepts of what we're trying to accomplish.
And they're airheads.
Yeah. Get that too sometimes.
Well, selection is a never-ending process. That's another great quote, and I think it's very true. And again, you just look at the NFL. You guys who they've been playing that game their whole life for the most part, right? I mean, they've played thousands and thousands of hours of doing football training, and they're being scrutinized so much. We're taking guys who may have never ever done anything other than. I mean, there are people that hire on Dallas Police Department never fired a gun until the academy. Mm. Okay, so it is not like you're, Now, I didn't grow up. I grew up in East Texas with a family that we lived on a ranch, out with land, and my parents did real estate. I mean, I didn't have any kind of, prior training or knowledge or anything like this coming over. So I had to learn how to do this job. I didn't walk in the Dallas Police Department knowing anything about any of this. So I had to learn it. So I'm an example. It can be done. Now, if you can do it, if you can get something out ahead of time, you have, former military guys that come through there. Now, just because you were prior military does not necessarily mean great success over there. We've had it both ways. We've had
or
guys,
as an officer in general.
Well, yeah, an officer in general. But we had guys come over there that are prior military, and they just slide right in very seamlessly. They realize this is a different animal. They do a great job, and it never a problem. And then you have some people who it is a struggle from the day they get there, and some of them ultimately until the time they leave. They cannot cross-reference some things. They just cannot do it. And not saying anything against them, but their prior military experience sometimes is, a negative with that individual.
Endurance.
Yeah, and so I don't look at it as, hey, this person is because of the military. The last two guys we just took from my squad, both of them are prior military. One's still in the reserves. But the ones before that never were. And so, yeah, I'm proud of the 6 picks that have been made since I've been there. Those guys are really good dudes. They all work hard. And if I call them right now and go, hey, this is what we're going to be doing, I have no doubt they would just roll right in there and go. And it's not just those guys. The other guys in my squad, too, do a really good job. But, again, that's part of that, legacy or whatever you want to call it, that you're leaving behind. You want to make things better, is that you want to put people in a good position so when you're not there, or you're on vacation and you're out, or when you're eventually gone, they can just step right in and take over that role, and I think that's what a lot of what Tim did with us is he made sure that, hey, you got to be able to know how to do this, because eventually either I'm not going to be here today or I'm going to be gone eventually. You got to know how to do it, and so it matters.
So you've picked 6
Yep.
since you've been the ASL.
Yes.
That's a very large portion of, is that to include your sergeant?
Well,
Or is that 7 now?
Well, we evaluate them in the school. We didn't have anything to do with picking him. I'm sorry. We didn't have anything to do with picking him. But
No offense.
Yeah, but yeah. Well, I represent one of 9. Danny's one of 9 in his squad, and so there's 9. So there's 8 other people, and I have 2 carryovers that that Tim picked, and then everybody else is promoted or left, and so we just replaced them, and it takes time, And the 2 newest guys, one came over in April and one came in June, and so they're just now really, but they're already participating in operations and doing a good job, but they're still new, so.
Now that's a huge undertaking too, to basically rebuild your entire squad over the course of 8 years or 6 years. I mean, yeah. I basically went through the same thing. I showed up and mine was the most senior squad, and I was very grateful for that. But with that comes guys just dropping off as they go.
Very quickly became the oldest squad to the youngest.
Yeah. And that I wish it would have gone a little bit differently. I wish that some of the guys didn't leave for the reasons they had to leave. Yeah. But building that was also a lot of fun for me. It was a challenge to mesh personalities and skill sets and get the right people that don't hate each other all the time. And sometimes we mess that up, but yep. I mean, I almost flipped that entire squad, and now you're in the same boat. So it's
well, I think in the group that was there when he left, and and I have 2 that are carryovers from that, and both of them are very capable of doing this job. I mean, it wasn't like they were picked. You're like, oh no. I mean, they're very capable of doing what they need to do, and
you need those guys to stick around so they can help you train up the new ones.
There's no question, because you cannot do it all by yourself. Look, you can put in your effort, you can do a lot of things, but you've got to, you can't do it all by yourself. Like a head coach can't do it, or the offensive coordinator can't do it all by himself. You got those position coaches, those senior guys, and every great team has those senior guys, even not necessarily being the ASL, that really, carried the mail a lot of days just doing things, because you may be at a drive-by or a meeting, or you may be, helping with a class somewhere, and those guys are ones out trying to show those guys. And I think that goes back to those fundamentals that those senior guys, my 2 most senior guys now, they are very strong in their fundamentals as far as how to handle the door, how to process that first room, handle the room you're coming into. They're very good at that. And so if I was gone for a week and you sent the 2 newest guys to go with them to learn how to do this, those 2 guys could do it wouldn't even think twice about it. So I'm fortunate in that regard.
All right, back to our book. It says, in the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. Now, your first year here with SWAT, you experienced quite a bit of chaos. Kind of walk us through your roles of what you were doing that day with Oak Park, your takeaways, and do you feel like that changed you?
Well, it changes you no matter, and good, bad, and indifferent. You learn, again, it's just like when you're in patrol and then the first time you roll up on a guy's been shot, or, or you hear shots being fired, it becomes real. Now, not that you didn't know it was already there, but it becomes real for you at that very moment. And I remember my very first, foot chase, my very first car chase, first time being shot at. That resonates with you, and you recognize whether you did anything right or wrong, like, you just have to, it's just something you, like, all right, timestamp that, get better, move on, figure that out. And so with us, or for me, Oak Park happened, I hadn't even been on a year yet, or as far as in SWAT. And a lot of things went wrong. A couple things ended up not working out, but great operators did great things that day and solve problems, which is what you want to do. And you realize really quick, like, I want to be on that camp, not in that camp. And I don't care where you go in the world, within the first, couple weeks, you kind of realize that. Not that you didn't know that already, but on that, when it's real, and it's as real as it gets, and people are getting shot, and there's chaos, there's that calm in the storm, like, hey, go get this, we're going to do this, ABC 1, 2, 3. And you're like, that's the dude you want to, one, he'll keep you alive and keep you safe, and hopefully you'll pick up a few things. And so on Oak Park, one of the things that didn't go right, it was the drivers were not sure where we were going. Well, the military has the 160th, the special operations guy, and those are the finest helicopter pilots in the world. They get you exactly where they're going, and those guys will tell you they'll fall asleep on the bird, and they'll wake them up 1 minute out, and say, hey, we're about to hit the deck. They have no doubt about where they're going because they have the best. And so with us, we've had great people down there, but if they don't know where they're going, and it wasn't their fault, it was the command's fault at the time that didn't set them up for success. So we were delayed coming in on the seaside, and we're already behind the Alpha side team of where we're trying to hit the house near the same point. So we're already behind. We were just getting off the APC Todd Well house tonight to go do a breach and hold on the seaside door that faces the Bravo side. So for y'all that don't understand that door doesn't look out in the backyard. It faces towards the side of the house. It's just on the back side. And the shots are being fired. It's by the time my foot hits the ground coming off the APC, you can hear the shots. So we're not even at the door. So we didn't even get to the door. So you're like, shots fired, don't know where they're coming from. Your immediate action drill is to do what? Fall back to the APC. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And where I was is just the way the APC was. I was in front of these windows, and so I'm just kind of looking into there. You can't tell where it was. Had we been on time, the door we breached, when it swung open, we'd been looking right at the couch where the suspect that was shooting through the front door was laying. We were 8 feet from him, had we been on time. So when you go back and look at, and again, it's not the APC driver's fault, it's not his fault. It was our fault as a division that failed. Had we had been on time, just on time, when that door came open, we may have prevented him from shooting or at least minimized the amount of rounds that he fired because we've been looking right at him. And so when you recognize early on that those few seconds can matter a huge amount downrange, that ripple effect, stone going in the water and that ripple getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that very, very much illustrated to me right then that, man, we could have solved that problem right then, maybe even prevented anybody from being shot. Or minimize the amount of shots that had, reduced them. And you may not have had what happened to Dale, who's limping still to this day because of that. And so not that you had anything to do with that, I didn't on that particular operation, you recognize that, man, we've got to do this better. And I'll give Todd Wellhouse credit. We were sitting there and the whole thing, and what people don't understand is in the middle of that deal, we had another call out. And so the ones that didn't get involved in the shooting, which was just a few of them, they like, y'all stay. The rest of us had to go to that call out, go solve that one, and then come back to that one for PES and SIU and everything, because it was just that's how crazy it was. And so when I came back, you had all these SWAT guys, all these mags, unloading all these. There was just ammo everywhere because you had like 30-something guys there. There was ammo everywhere because nobody wearing cameras, and all that kind of thing, and only had just a few guys shoot.
And you're talking about they had to count the rounds.
Had to count the rounds because of the shooting, yeah.
For documentation.
And then we come back, they go, where have y'all been? Because they didn't know we had left. Like, we just went to the other call out. Well, y'all get over here and get in line and do the same thing. So that took forever. And so we were doing the round counts and all that. And you recognized, because you didn't know how many people had been shot. We just knew we had several people had been shot. Dale was bad. We didn't know what had happened at the time. And we saw some chaos from some of the people there. And you saw a few guys steady the ship and go, this is what we're going to do. Shut up, be quiet, do this, you do that, you come with me, you do this, whatever. And so we, when they started pulling them out on the Delta side, Claggett and Emberlin had port and covered a Delta side window and started throwing, Emberlin was throwing gas in. Well, they started coming out the window on the Delta side, just some of the people inside, ended up being all of them, we didn't know at the time. And so they yelled at us from the seaside to come to them to help them in. So we had to break down a wooden fence to get to them and to evac those people out to our APC on the seaside. And there's still all stuff chatter going on. You're just trying to stay out of the way as a new guy and just do whatever you're told. And Claggett walks up and says, go with him at the window and y'all do that. He walks around to the Alpha side, starts talking to whoever's left on the entry team. And he comes back around after they'd already gassed it, and he says, y'all come with us. So Edmund Chaka, Emberlin, and I are there. They've already moved the suspects out of that house to the seaside. And they come around, and you can see body armor, but no SWAT guys, because they had dumped it. Yeah, dumped it. Dolfo and Dale, they had dumped all their gear on the ground and evac them out. And you don't know who it is. You're just like, damn, what in the hell is going on? You just don't know. And you don't say anything. You're just trying to stay out of the way and do what you're told. And we had just gotten the small APCs. Hadn't been there a year yet. We only had them for a few months. And Sergeant Newton had dropped off the Alpha side team. They had gone through the gate and gone to the front door. So when they got shots fired, he drove through the fence. That was the first time we'd ever done that. I mean, I don't think I even knew we could do that. So he just drove that APC.
Yeah, Keith will definitely tell you we definitely can do that.
Yeah, we can definitely
just
do
can't back out.
Yeah, well, can't. Yeah, and so he drives in and he puts the APC between the downed officers in the house. And Sergeant Newton, man, he did a great job on that one. He did. I mean, nobody knew we could do that. So here's the APC in the yard, and you go around, and Claggett says, "You're going with us. Grab a 517 for the attic." I'm not a gas guy at the time. I'm new. I'm like,
"What's a 517?"
A 517 is it is a gas canister that puts out chemical agents. Tear gas. We call them, and at the time, that was the model number that Safariland had it for them, was a 517. That's what we called them, 517s. And so he says, get a 517, come with me. I said, all right. And so I go to the APC, and I see a gas guy there. And I'm like, where's your guy? I need a 517. He's like, it's in my bag. Go get it. And he was kind of discombobulated about what we're trying to do. I'm like, well, give me the gas. I'm like, I'm about to get yelled at by this guy because you're not doing what you need to do. And I'm like, don't get me yelled at. Go get your. And he's like, I don't have it or whatever. He's all messed up. And so Sergeant Newton, he says, I'll get it. And he puts the APC in park, and he crawls over, because back then there was no magazine for the explosive like there is now. So he just walked between the seats, and he lifts up the seat, and he goes, here, young man. He always says, gives me the 517. He says, here. And so I go up, and Claggett's like, hey, you're going to go. And Tim's already coming up with the plane. He's like, hey, we're going to go in there. We got to clear this thing. Hold on the attic until we get everything cleared, which is the normal, mode of operation, until we get ready. It's like, okay. And Steve's like, just hang on to that. So we go in there, start clearing the house, and we do all that kind of stuff. And then I handed the 517 to, I think it was Randy Lancaster I handed to, and he threw it up in the attic. Of course, it was clear. They'd all come out. And you're looking around, and you're seeing just equipment everywhere, people everywhere. And they're like, so where were you beginning? I was like, well, I started on the seaside, and then I got called down the Delta side to move these people out of the house to take them back to the APC. And then I got told to come to this corner to hold this window. And then I got told from the window to come to the APC to get gas. And I got told to bring the gas inside the house. And then I got told to go clear some rooms inside the house. And they're like, and the detective was trying to keep up with it. He goes,
put it on the board for me.
Yeah. And so, well, it was just, and he was just as confused as I think everybody was, because it was not planned for me to do all that, but it was just, I guess I wasn't doing anything, and somebody just says, you're not busy, come do something. And I just kept getting tasked with all these little things. Ended up being, like that number 4 going in the front door from the front side. Didn't even go in the seat side. We didn't open that door till later. And it was very clear that something had gone wrong. We didn't know what and to what degree. People were shot, and it was, very involved, obviously. And it wasn't until later till we found out exactly what happened and talked about what you talked about earlier with the early morning warrant. It was like, well, did they not? Well, what happened was we were late, and they had already gotten the word from another location that had been hit by the feds that they got hit. So they were kind of on edge and were somewhat expecting, maybe for us to show up. So they were ready for us in a sense. So that's what happened on that one.
We've covered a lot so far, but you've been involved in most of the major incidents for almost 2 decades now.
Yeah.
Is there one in particular you want to really dive into?
Well, you have the guy that tried to shoot, or he did shoot up at headquarters and try to put out the explosive devices outside of headquarters, which was June of 2015. That was obviously a very big deal. In a sense, that was it was monumental in the sense that, of course, it garnered worldwide attention for what he had done, and then what our answer to that was. That was Keith Riggs shooting him with a 50 cal, and it's the first, and I think the only time still that American policing's ever used it to shoot a suspect. And he was in an armored car. For people that don't know what happened there, he had bought an armored vehicle on eBay, I believe, and had shot at us, or shot at the headquarters building late one night on a Friday night, and set out improvised explosive devices, and was calling them in with his phone and making them go off, and he destroyed cars in the parking lot. It's a crazy deal. And how nobody else was hurt is still just an absolute miracle of God to have nothing like that happen. And that was a big deal. And you're thinking, man, that might be one, at that point, probably the biggest thing that ever happened, maybe in the history of Dallas SWAT. And then you go 13 months later, on July 7th of 2016. And where that thing started at headquarters is right down the road from where this thing started, just a little bit further north into downtown. And then you have, the cowardly attack on the officers on the protest. And, how that all started, and then how it, progressed into what happened, and then and what we did as far as, going in there, having multiple people engage him on the street, multiple people of our guys engaging him inside the building, him shooting back at them, and that's real. And Danny was on one side of the building or the hallway. I had come in the other, and y'all were just a stone's throw ahead of us, the way it all shook out. I didn't know y'all were in there. I don't think y'all knew that we'd come in the doors that we'd come in. And when I'm getting out of the truck and putting on my gear, I hear the last shots coming out of that window, and that's when he was shooting Mike Smith. I could hear that. Didn't know at the time what was happening, but I still kind of hear that today, in my mind about how that was going. Didn't know what was happening.
Yeah, we were in the hallway and actually thought he was shooting kids inside. So
okay, yeah.
The last shots on Mike Smith we heard.
Yeah, because you could see just a little bit of a flight, and you just, and the way it echoed, I don't think people realize how much that was involved down there with the echo of the rifle in the buildings. It was so hard. You had a general idea, but to say what he was doing, putting on my gear and running in that building, there was 4 of us, and Baines, who ended up with y'all, was with me, and we weren't in the building, and the one of the officers there is just basically pointing up the stairs. He really didn't say much. He was just probably in disbelief what was going on. As we go up that stairway, we see the blood, and we knew somebody had already tagged him from on the street, but we didn't know exactly who, didn't know, whatever. So we just started following the blood trail like you would a wounded animal. And we got to the second deck, and I ran up to the third to see it had the blood gone all the way up, and it didn't. So I'm like, hey, he's on that floor, let's go. And they all pushed through the door. So I was the 4th one coming through that door. There was 4 of us. And Baines went left, ended up over there with y'all, and I went right. And I saw where he had shot through the glass and reached through there and pulled the door open from the inside where his blood was. And so I knew I was on his trail. Didn't know where everybody else was. And just by the time we did that was y'all's first volley with him. And I get into that room, and you can just see the blood, and now I'm getting closer, and I can tell I'm fairly close. And my thought is that wherever he is now with y'all, he knows he can go back the way he came, because y'all had probably cut him off. I didn't know it was y'all or who it was. And so I just kind of stood there and waited at the end of that hallway for a second. I said, he's going to come out of that room and come right back towards us, and that'll be it. We can solve it right now. And he stayed in that room and never came back out, which is where it ended up being. Ryan Scott came running down telling us where he was, we were actually standing right outside the wall where he was. We didn't know it at the time. And we were coming up with some hasty plans about what to do, what not to do. And after a while, and I'm still jealous of Marshall Milligan coming up with it first. He's like, why don't we just drive the robot down there and blow him up? And I was like, why did I not think of that sooner? I'm still mad at him for coming up with that sooner. But Great job.
In usual Marshall Milligan, it was just kind of like almost with a disgust, like,
Yeah.
I don't understand why we just don't put a charge on this robot and drive it down there and blow his ass up.
Yeah, that's kind of what it was. Well, we had gotten called back as the ASLs to talk about the plan or whatever we're trying to do, and Ryan had come up with about 19 different ways of solving that, if you know Ryan. And it was, and I was down with a few of them, actually.
Any of them involve a saw.
Yeah, so, well, we talked about shooting, so anyway, but he was thinking outside he was coming up late, but I'd walk back, and if somebody had said it sooner, I didn't hear it. That was the first time I had heard somebody mention that, was Marshall. And within the next however many minutes, that plan was going into effect as far as prepping it and getting it built and all that. So outstanding literally thinking outside the box on how we were using that. And again, that's obviously very well known. It's a tragic day. I mean, just cannot imagine, what those families are still going through, just all the people that were down there. I remember jumping out of the truck, and driving through squad cars going by me, going the opposite way at the time, not knowing they were emergency evac and, wounded people out of there, officers and civilians, jumping out and just carnage, just debris, and seeing officers just tucked in everywhere and running, and running in every direction. And then to go up there and just basically turn into that waiting game, which is what we were doing, while all that was going on.
4.5 hours.
Yeah. And, we'd already been at work for, a few hours already that night, and that turned into the next day. And I had left my phone in the truck when I jumped out. And so, and we had a little lull in the action, and Chris Webb. So when we get done, getting ready to get everything done, we knew what the plan was going to do or going to be. And I had told Josh Hertel, he was a sergeant over there at the time, I said, Josh, if we leave here, we're going to leave this walkway or this hallway open to the garage. He could get by us because we got to fall back so far. We've got to stay here until y'all are ready. And then I don't know what we're going to do because we can't leave it. And he's like, who's got robots? Well, we didn't have anything we could use. And so he calls down there, and somebody got a hold of the FBI. And to their credit, the two dudes came up there. They go, what do you need? We go, we need you to take your robot, put it down here in the hallway, monitor it, so we can see if he comes out. And they're like, hey, whatever we need to do. Those guys did a great job. They didn't do anything but what we asked. And I was like, hey, I need one guy to stay with me so I can coordinate with the FBI, and one guy to hold the Hawks. We cannot take a chance on him getting away from us. And everybody was doing so much work. I mean, it was so much going on. I can only imagine, from your side over there. But we just knew that if he tries to get away, he can't get by where all y'all were, but this is where he could get by. So we're like, we got to put that robot there. So they put the robot, and we fell back as far as we could. But we couldn't leave until we knew we were about ready to go. And so Josh goes, hey, they're about ready to start moving it down. Y'all need to move back. So we moved back, set the robot down there, set it off. And then when the wall kind of caved in, it almost was covering him up. So we moved back up to there, and I knew the room was, had been destroyed, but you couldn't see him. And Chris Webb moves in there just over my shoulder and pulls back that one piece of drywall, and there he was right underneath it. And so I was just looking right at him, and you knew it was over with. And I don't think, I know I didn't, nobody could understand the gravity, what had already happened and what was going to be happening for, the next however many days after that. Knew people had been hurt, knew people had been shot, to what extent, didn't know how many officers, how many of this. You just didn't know. And it just took the whole night into the next morning. And there's that picture of a lot of us sitting in the lobby of El Centro watching the news, and for most of us, seeing stuff that we did not know about.
Getting details right there for the first time, even though we were there.
We were there. We had just taken off our body armor. Of course, it's July, it's hot and everything, and we were just kind of just wiped out and watching the news for the first time, learning stuff. So,
what was going through your mind watching that after what you just gone through?
Well, originally there was a thought of having two people there. They thought there was two guys, and some people have been diverted to, I think, the Omni. I think Rob Hamilton, those guys went down there. And so, again, always trying to look down the range like, man, is there somebody else? Is this a coordinated effort? And so we were kind of, and I know this sounds easy to say this now, but we're like, don't let your guard down, because there could be some dude in a hallway or a building right now just playing, possum on us, like a sleeper guy or something, that just waiting for things to.
Or you could have had bombs planted like the headquarters.
Well, I mean,
guy.
13 months ago or earlier, we just had that. And so everybody was. To sit there and say you were just done. I mean, everybody was wiped out, but at the same time, you're like, this thing could still go on right now. It could be happening. We may not be done. It was just people just everywhere.
It was a single actor, but it was a national movement. Mm-hmm. I mean, it wasn't like this is an isolated guy with an isolated idea. So we were waiting for the next one. We're waiting for the follow-up. We're waiting for more of this. It wasn't, I mean, he ended up being a lone wolf in this regard on the actions, but it was a collective mindset.
Well, if you think about the officers that were killed in Louisiana, just a few days later, that shooter was in Dallas the night of July 7th. They've proven it. They had pictures of him.
He did a video.
He did a video, and they had pictures of him, stills from the room that was in Dallas. And so was he...
He claimed to be inspired.
Yeah, absolutely inspired by that. And so he could have easily gone bad right then and there. That was on a Thursday into Friday. He could have gone bad on Friday.
It's suspected he ended up showing up that Sunday at headquarters, and that was the scare we had at headquarters.
And so that was another thing. We spent the whole day clearing the whole...
I remember that.
Because you have IBM and then us having to clear all those vehicles because somebody said they saw a guy with a hood running around with a gun and they didn't do anything about it. They just ran in and told somebody. It says, so we spent the next 4 hours clearing that just a few days later. So to what Danny has said about it, it was a national level in the world took note of that, obviously, as far as everything that was going on. And you're naive to think that, hey, the game just got changed again. It's a new set of rules that you're dealing with because, 13 months earlier, we're like, they had never seen radio remote control devices like we had there. This guy had never been in the military. He learned it on internet. And so you're like, hey, the game just got changed. The rules just got changed a little bit. And you have to recognize that as a police officer, not just a SWAT guy, that you're dealing with things that you never talked about. And we never talked about explosives in the academy or how to deal with that or had to be aware of IEDs or anything like that. Now it is something you got to be aware of as an everyday police officer. And then that thing happening, July 7th changed it again. And just like 9/11 shifted the whole world, especially America, that happened. I mean, I've been on for 2 years when 9/11 happened and how that changed everything that we do. And those are benchmarks in American policing, those two incidents. And they happened, 13 months apart right there in downtown Dallas.
Messages matter, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's no question. And so those are two big incidents that obviously gain worldwide. There's a lot of things that go on every day that prepare you for those incidents. Those warrants, that training we talked about earlier. But those are things that the average listener who doesn't know anything about necessarily Dallas, that's something they probably are aware of.
So Sun Tzu wrote, "Even the finest sword plunged into salt water will eventually rust." How do you deal with some of the things that you've seen and some of the things you've been a part of?
Well, it kind of goes back to your question earlier as far as de-evolving or the complacency is that no matter how good you are, how sharp you are, how shiny you are, we all get rusty. We all this. And you take a couple weeks off on vacation, you realize you're just not what it was just when you left, 2 weeks earlier. Or people I've had, multiple guys coming through that have been out for injury. It takes time. And so that is something that happens at no fault of their own. But what you can do is you can be vigilant about not allowing that to happen to yourself and your people. And if you do that yourself, how can I hold anybody else accountable? And so that's something you got to do right away as any kind of senior guy or leadership, is that you got to hold yourself accountable first. And I'm going to be sharp. I'll have my equipment ready to go. It's going to be in working order. It's going to do what I need it to do. My batteries are good. My radio's charged. My zero's good. I've got all my gear, like today, rain, weather gear, cold weather gear, whatever you need, you have that. And so if you're complacent or you fall off or you back to that quote as far as you could get rusty, it's hard to keep that going if you're not doing it yourself. And so it can happen to anybody and not necessarily by fault, but most of the rust is brought on by people doing it themselves. Obviously, you can injury, anything like that can happen. But you gotta, it is every day. It's the grind.
Well, so the way I read into his question was the salt water eventually makes even the finest sword rusty. I took it as over time, these experiences you've had can wear you down. And I think maybe he's also talking about like mental and also physical. So maybe answer to that. And I'll also say that you are someone that there's no question that you'll always pass the PT test. It's not even a concern. No one even thinks about, well, maybe Matt might not pass it this time. And I'd say I look over my 8 years being here, and you're someone who's always real healthy, stays in shape, doesn't have any health issues. So what do you do to maintain that? I mean, what is your lifestyle, or what is that focus on there for you to maintain mental health and your physical health for this job?
Well, I'm sorry if I misunderstood what you're asking. I guess that's the way I took it. I think, yeah, absolutely, and I can see that. You're only going to be good at a job that you enjoy, I think, is a big part of that. And if you may enjoy it at one time, but maybe you just lost the lust for it or the desire for it, it's really hard to be good at that job. And so, biggest thing is I still enjoy getting up, coming and doing this job. And when I know we got a couple of warrants to run that day, man, that is a great day. I love that, coming in and, jumping in there and solving problems and going and doing all that. Because, the call-outs, you're at the mercy of the winds. They just happen when they happen. They're not pre-planned, obviously. But the warrants is obviously, that's what, helps prepare us. I think that's why we're being so successful in a lot of this stuff, is because we do run a lot of warrants. We're active. But at the same time, trying to keep a good mental focus, like, hey, this thing's real. We got to do sharp. I don't eat as probably clean as I would like to. I can be honest with that. I enjoy Mexican food.
Blue Goose.
Blue Goose. Yeah.
Shout out Blue Goose.
Yeah, shout out to Blue Goose. But it's all about moderation too. You can enjoy things to a certain degree. I enjoy it. But yeah, I stay active. I run a lot, because, it's part of the PT test. But I remember playing football, and they're like, you got to be agile, mobile, and hostile. And I think that kind of still matters now. You got to be agile enough to do things, like coming through the house, and moving through, because these things are not wide open, as you know. You got to be able to have good footwork, and I think, playing sports and all that happens. You got to be mobile enough to be able to, move through the doorways, and the hallways, or get off the APC and go. And you got to be able to take the fight to them sometimes. And I think that's a fine line, because you got to know when to do it, when not to do it. There's moments that you can seize to solve problems, and you got to know when that is. And that's something you can't coach. It's just inherent. Some people, I just think, just are more comfortable doing that than others. But yeah, you try to take good care of yourself. I try to stay active. The biggest thing goes back to, I have to be able to do what I'm asking somebody else to do. So if I want you to go up there and run one at this door and go solve problems in there, I got to be able to do it myself. If you need to pry a door or a cage or set a harpoon or go up and port a window, I got to be able to do all that myself. And by staying involved and trying to do things with the training, and and if you lead by example, as far as like, hey, I'll be PTing, I'll be shooting, I'll be doing my thing, because I don't want anybody to say, like, he's like, well, it's no surprise he failed the PT test or he's struggling. I can't imagine somebody saying that about me. Or you go out and go, man, he's struggling with his shooting. Well, he never comes out and shoots. Well, you're not going to be able to say that. Now, I've said this before. If you make a mistake or something goes wrong, people go, man, I'm surprised by that. He usually is solid and squared away. Whereas they go, figures. You can't live like that. And if they're saying that about you in this job, then you need to leave, or you need to reevaluate what you're doing in life. Because if your people, your peers, whether they've been there longer than you or not, if they don't have that confidence in you, then how are you expected to go in and do your job? Because you may be tapping that guy up, and they go, that guy just tapped me up. Now I know that guy, man, he wasn't shooting very good. Or I got to run up a flight of stairs, and I don't know if that guy's going to make. You can't have that doubt in your own mind, because if you doubt in your own mind, what are they going to think?
Matt, in that leadership role of the ASL, do you tell people? I mean, some people may not be aware that they've devolved, and they're not performing up to par.
There are times where you've got to discuss things with certain people, but we've had good athletes that have stayed there way past the time they should have left.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like they couldn't pass the PT test, but they were there. And again, you try to take
in body, but not mind.
Yeah, you try to take care of your house. Like, there's 4 squads there. If somebody from another squad come out and goes, hey, Matt, what do you think? They solicited that information. I would tell them. As a whole, it's really not my job. Just like I would go to that ASL and go, hey, he really struggled on this assignment. You may want to discuss that with him. As they would do that with me, and that's the way it should be. But there are times when it's live, we don't have time for discussion. You got to just get after somebody and tell them. So, yeah, that happens. I've had discussions with people over the years about, hey, you need to, this. And that's not an easy discussion. They usually push back, and I get that. But at the same time, that's part of your job. Is in that job. Nobody says it's going to be easy.
Because somebody's job may affect the whole team.
Well, absolutely.
And
you're not there to make enemies, but you're not there to make friends either.
Sure.
And so that's part of that leadership, is that you got to have a responsibility. We can be out and go out and have food and have lunch and with people and get along and have a great time, but it will not save you if you're messing up. and they know that, and that's not. And it goes the other way too. They could come back and go, Matt, you really screw that up, and that's fine. And and they all know if they need to say something to me, that's fine. I try to minimize those opportunities, where they can't, because But
I'm taking off today. Yeah, so you all just do your thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's but I want them. If anything, people go, I expect him to hold me accountable, and if that's what they want to say, that's fine, because I 100% believe in that. So yeah.
All right. So if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer defeat. What have you learned about yourself through the Dallas Police Department in your career here?
I think that many people, everybody at this table, we all came from different walks of life, different parts of the country, different things, that many different people can be great just great police officers or law enforcement. Dallas is a melting pot in a lot of ways. You look at people. So there is not one common thread, I think, that sets you up for success. The one thing that I believe in is you just got to be committed and disciplined to be good. Not walking in and go, I'm going to be the greatest homicide guy or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think a lot of people say that, and they're not really committed to be the great. Whereas you got to say, look, and I've said this before, when I came over, I just wanted to be the guy, because you don't know what you're going to do. You don't know your aptitude. I mean, I didn't think when I came over here, I was like, man, they're going to fire me any day, that first 6 months, because you screw something up. You're like, they're going to just kick me out of here. And I just knew they were going to, because you'd mess this up or whatever. They're like, no, we don't want you. You have to have that desire to say, look, I wanted to be the guy that go, hey, I'm taking him on a drive-by to go do this. Can we take Matt to go do this? And you're like, yeah, that's fine. Or can I borrow him to do a pool? And when I first started out, that was one of the first things I started doing was setting up the APCs and the pools on the windows and prying doors. And you would get used by other teams. They would come and go, hey, can I borrow Matt to do this? I'm like, yeah, go ahead. And so when they trust you to come in and do that, you're like, hey, that says something, because they're not going to pick you. They don't trust you. And back then we had a lot more people to pick from. It was such a bigger team. So when you got picked to go do his job, it was like a badge of honor that somebody trusted you to go do that job. And so when you look at those things, I think that when you look at what helps make you successful, being prepared mentally, looking downrange, coming up with solutions like how can I get better, trying to perfect your game, trying to look at how I can, again, there's no shame in trying to emulate people who've done it before you, right? We all do that. And I've heard people say, oh, I don't want to. I was like, dude, look, it's hard to come up with something brand new over here. Pretty much everything we're doing, somebody's already done it. You're just trying to master that skill. And so there's no, so looking at good people that are above you or wherever you are and saying, tell me why that's the best way to do it. And then be a student of the game. And back to that quote, if you think about this, if they're confident in what they can do and what their strong points and their deficiencies are, and they take the time to do that assessment on their opponent, they know where to go, how to strike them, how to go after them. But when you don't know, you're just 50-50 whether or not you're going to win or not, and I think that's a lot of that times what happens.
All right, so this one's kind of personal for me here. If words of command are not clear and distinct, if orders are not thoroughly understood, then the general is to blame. But if orders are clear and the soldiers nevertheless disobey, then it's the fault of the officers. I would never characterize you as being timid or afraid to speak your mind, really. Oftentimes, I'd get a text message or a phone call on the way home from operations at 2 or 3 in the morning. And
don't ever do that again.
By oftentimes, I mean every time for the first probably 5 years I was there. You let me know where I screwed up and what went well. And, I mean, we had like our own little debriefs after just about every operation, and I always appreciated the feedback. I mean, it was big for me because even you weren't even the ASL at that point, but you felt like, hey, I need to say something to you, and you were never afraid to actually say it. Is this something that you've always had?
Well, I think it is to a large degree. Again, I'll go back to sports. Playing sports for a long time matters. And I was the defensive captain, 8th grade, all the way through my senior year. I called essentially every defensive play for us almost all the way through for 5 years. And so not that other people couldn't do it. It fell to me, and I was glad to do it, and they trusted me to do it. But, just like when you go from junior high to high school to JV to varsity, the game just gets up, it's faster paced, there's more going on, there's more stuff to keep up with, and you realize you got to elevate yourself and continually ascend. And that's one of the things I always like to say, we're constantly ascending around here. We're not just waiting, we're not just resting on our laurels. And you recognize that if you have a passion for it and you have a knack, I guess is, because some people are just more soft-spoken than others, if you have the ability to communicate and you can get your point across quickly and timely and, and to the point, sometimes it may be brutal, but it's to the point where you can make calls on the fly and you are trusted to make decisions. And that goes back to, I think that's a big part of what helped me over here was doing that, because you get a play in and then they would adjust. That's exactly what we do over here, right? You have a plan of what the base defense is, and then they do something different and you adjust off of that. It's very much what we do over here on operations. And so I think it correlates, and not to say that it's the same, but I just think it helped me. And so I was comfortable giving out changes then, like, hey, we need to change this or move that. And I guess it primed me for being more vocal, hey, you got to be one to be talking. And there's times where you realize there's no time for a committee. Everybody else got to be quiet and just listen to what we're doing. This is what we're doing. And this is how it's going to happen. And because if everybody's talking, not everybody's listening. And so when you get into here and you start understanding and the game slows down for you and you kind of see how all those places and those chess pieces are moving and all this, and then it comes down to like, well, that guy probably didn't realize that because somebody probably didn't take the time to tell him. And so I might be able to do it right now. But that's that phone call on the way home, saying, hey, did y'all ever consider this? And that's something I always try to do. And instead of just telling you that you're wrong, go, hey, what was your thought on this? And you may be able to tell me something that I was unaware of. I'm like, okay, I can see why you did that. Or you go, okay, well, that really didn't matter. It's still a dumb idea. And here's the reasons why you would not do it that way. And that was the way it was explained to me. And I learned that way by saying, okay, here was your plan. This is why it wouldn't work. And here's the 4 or 5 things. Because if I come in and go, that's a bad idea, we're not going to do it. You go, okay, fine, what are we going to do? And I say, we're going to do it this way. You're like, okay. And it works out. You're like, okay. But you didn't learn anything. All you learned was it was a bad idea. You didn't learn why it was a bad plan. And that's the big thing about us over there, and I've always tried to do, and not just me, a lot of guys do it. And that's something that Tim did a lot, is like, let me tell you why that's a bad idea. The reason why that's a bad idea, you see that stump right there? That is not, we're not going to get by that. Or there's a gas meter right by the window you want to pull, you jackass. We're not going to be able to do that. You got to realize that. And so little things like that, you're like, okay. And so all those little things, matter. And then you put that in there and you work on that, and then you add to it and you add to it. And I think that's what happens when, there'd be times where I'm like, why are they doing this? And you've been in there where you hear stuff on the radio and you're like, that makes absolutely no sense. Because you've already worked through all that in your mind where they have it. And you know that at step 21, they will realize that's a bad idea. They're at step 9 because they think it's good. And you're like, we've already worked all past that. We've already solved all that. The 9 guys over here all recognize that's a bad idea. And so you're trying to say the reason why that's a bad idea is all this, because you have time. Or sometimes you don't have that time. And so you're like, no, we're not going to do this. And people are like, well, he's just doing that. It's like, no, I've already worked all the way through it. And so those are the kind of discussions that I have with you. Like, did you recognize this? Did you anticipate that? Was there a thought to do this? And I think sometimes, there's a great saying, don't fall in love with the plan. And, that plan's got to be able to be adjusted to some degree, to somewhat. And, so I think sports has a big part of it. For me, it did. Some people may not. But I would hate for somebody to be hurt, for God to be killed. And I go, I knew if we did that, that was a bad idea. I knew if we did this, we would have solved that problem. And I didn't say anything. And you're hurt or killed. And I go back to Todd Wellhouse on Oak Park. When that happened, he looked at me just dead in the eye, and he says, if you're ever here long enough to matter and where you have a say-so, don't ever let this shit happen again. That's exactly what he said to me, because he knew what had happened. And I remember that was February 2006, and I remember that till today about how poignant and straightforward that was, because Todd was very straightforward about things, because they all knew that there was a hiccup in that player, multiple hiccups, and they went along with it, and it is, all of them will tell you to this day, it still burns them down. And so I think that, along with, just your personality to some degree, being more straightforward, it just kind of culminated into saying things.
Well, I always appreciated it, whether I told you or not.
I think there's sometimes you may not have, but
Well, the timing might not have been right on all of them. 3, 4 o'clock.
Timing is important, and delivery.
Well, sometimes you got to get it out right now because otherwise I can't go to sleep.
Well, there is no question on delivery with Matt, and I like the way he was like, well, sometimes you tell him this and that, and I was like, no, you basically told me I screwed up. Like it was no, hey, what were you thinking? It was more like, what were you thinking?
Don't ever do that.
It wasn't
again.
really a question. Yeah, don't answer my question. Just understand that
Basically,
you're wrong.
the only thing you did right there is you tied your shoes correctly.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Thanks for getting to the right house.
Yeah, that's about all you did right today is go to the right door.
The McLennan County guys need to add a few more words on their T-shirt. They need to
Yeah, they're gonna have those long sleeves.
basic fundamentals, and then what was it? Agile, mobile, and hostile.
Yeah. Well, that's the big thing you tell them is that, look, the only thing you did right today was show up at the right house. Everything else you did was wrong.
I'm going to put that in the episode description, actually. Agile, mobile, and hostile.
You got to be.
So, what advice would you give to younger officers or anyone really looking to join a SWAT team?
Well, I've had many people ask me that. They see us at the range or they're out on the perimeter on a call out or warrant, and they go, hey, what do I need to do? I said, first of all, you need to stay in shape because I don't care how good you shoot. If you can't pass that PT test on a consistent basis, not to say that it is the most important thing, but for a guy coming over, you need to be in shape. And that's telling you need to work on your pistol because some of them don't have rifles or whatever. Try to go to classes. One of the guys we just took over here, the advanced SWAT school, the class that's going on right now this week, matter of fact, he was in it a few years ago. And that's how I met him because I saw him wearing a Dallas vest. I'm like, you work for Dallas PD? He said, yeah. Again, he was paid his own money to go to the school. And so, like, when I came over, I don't know if anybody in patrol ever went through a TTPOA class in preparation for SWAT. If they did, I didn't know anything about it because I certainly didn't. It was not even talked about. I didn't even know TTPOA existed. I came to SWAT. So I think there's no question that the officers that are coming on now, a lot of them are so much further ahead than when I came over. We didn't have a patrol rifle when I came over here. I mean, you didn't do anything like that. Active shooter, rapid response was something you did once you got in patrol. Now they do it in the academy, the shield work. They use 40 millimeters now. There's so much more that patrol does that's similar to us now, or as far as that kind of stuff, than we ever did. So, be astute and, be smart, stay in shape, work your pistol, try to go to some classes when you can. Not that necessarily that's going to necessarily help you for coming over here, but I think it shows desire and aptitude that people, they care. They give a damn. They want to be there. They're putting in the energy and the effort for it. And, be coachable. That is a big thing. You be coachable because we have seen guys come to these schools and not necessarily even ones that are selected, just the ones that come to the assessment schools with us. And by the time day 2 is over, you're like, I can't tell that guy anything.
Lack of aptitude.
Yeah, and if you can't be coachable in a class that you're trying to come over here, where are you going to be at in 2 years from now? And believe me, when you have that is. Boy, that is a deficit you cannot get out of. It is brutal because once they're dug in, you're done.
They self-destruct usually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Matt, I think that's a perfect way to wrap this up. Thank you for coming here today, number one, and for being a professional constantly. I mean, you're that guy that I don't think your shoes have ever been untied. And I appreciate that about you. I really do. There's a lot of guys over there that I really like and respect, and you're right up at the top of that list.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I don't care who you are, what you do. You want to believe that what you're doing matters. People will act like that. No, let's be honest. You want it to matter to some degree, and I appreciate that because it does matter. It matters to me. And so, if we can be professional and do our jobs, and there's if your people trust you, there's no better compliment in this business in my mind than the people that are on your side of you 100% trust you. If you can do that, man, you've done something right. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, your reputations matter around here, and me on the outside looking in a SWAT, I've worked with y'all on several operations back in the CRT days, and I've always respected your professionalism and your dedication to that unit. Everything that I've heard about you, and even some people that butted heads with you, I believe they respect you and they understand that everything you do for that unit is for Dallas SWAT, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And I love Dallas SWAT, and I love that unit, and I believe the accomplishments of that unit, the foundation that you've laid and you've poured on that very, very sturdy foundation that was left by the Claggets and the Cockrells and the Tim Houstons. You're pouring on top of that, and it's going to solidify that unit for years to come.
Yeah, no, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, Matt, thanks for your leadership. Thank you for taking that serious. And these guys already said, you being an epitome of a professional, it's greatly appreciated, and it's made the Dallas SWAT Team what it is. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, man.